Thanks everyone for watching yet another episode in which I talk about issues relating to public transit. And our topic for today is going to be topical. Sorry for the repeat. Um, so, because of current events, aka Slava Ukraini, Героям Slava, I thought it was useful to talk about issues relating to Eastern Europe. Now, it's not going to be very Ukraine focused. I can't not talk about Ukraine. I can't not talk about Russia when it comes to public transit. Not for any conflict reasons; they're just important places to talk about. But I think that it is going to be more about the more western parts of Eastern Europe, uh, and I think it's really important to understand public transport trends in Eastern Europe because so some of it is just about socialism and what happened in the Cold War. Essentially, how did public transport evolve differently in the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc? Um, but also, it's worthwhile thinking in terms of current investment patterns. Fun fact: Moscow has had so much investment in metro building in the last 30 years. I think that actually the majority of the Moscow metro, let me check this, but I believe that the majority of the Moscow metro has been built in post-communist Russia rather than in communist Russia. They're gonna have they're gonna have somewhere a chart of the total length or the total number of the stations. Yeah, here. So this is number of stations, and yeah, here most are up until 1990, not since 1990. I believe that on the length, it is actually a majority since 1990. Let me see the expansion timeline. Okay, yeah. So this is in length, and in 1990, it's 220 to 230, and today it's kind of weird because you have questions about various circle lines and do they count? And the circle lines, of course, have a much wider interstation, the outer circle, and so if you add all of these, I think it's actually pretty even. And so it's not. Yeah. So yeah. So we need to talk about issues of communist central planning and what has happened afterward because there has been a lot of divergence since. Um, so in the world of let's say the 19 let's call this the world of the early 20th century, but it is kind of really the world of the middle of the 20th century, coming from the culmination of investments in the first half of the 20th century. This is a world in which big cities are supposed to be the future. And if you read elite futurism from that era, for example, Isaac Asimov, you will see that there was kind of this assumption that everything would be cities. So in the robot novels, it is said that there are 8 billion people who live in 800 cities which are domed. And it's made very clear that these are very crowded or very dense cities. Now it's also mentioned that now it's very clear that they have suburbs. There's a plotline in The Caves of Steel when it's mentioned that people are thinking of merging New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington into one megalopolis. But but the cities are not portrayed as very sprawly, unlike in, for example, the futurism of a generation later, like Neuromancer, where they literally call this area the sprawl in capital S, capital S. And now in the United States, there's already a tendency toward building suburbs and abandoning the city. It's already visible at the very end of World War II. But this is not a trend that is visible in Europe that is visible anywhere in Europe at the time. In Europe, suburbanization happens, but a little bit later. So this is a system in which this is system in which cars exist. Okay, 1950 is not 1900, but cars are not viewed as something that everyone has. Now, in the United States, it's already viewed as something that they can already see a society in which everyone has a car, but Western Europe doesn't. And from the perspective of Eastern Europe, this is a consumer item. Now, something that we will see over this era, let's say the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, is that the Soviet bloc, in general communism, not just the Soviet bloc, but I think Yugoslavia, I think Yugoslavia was the same, did not really do consumer goods. Now, it is not the only part of the world that underbuilt consumer goods, because, for example, East Asian developmental states suppressed their own consumption. Now, this does not mean that they did not have consumer goods. They did. It does not mean they did not make consumer goods. The East Asian developmental states did for the purpose of export, and these were very good. The Japanese cars, then the Korean cars. In fact, cars became Japan's biggest export, and it was by accident. They didn't even intend for it to be one of the industries that they were going to nurture. It was just a growth industry, and Japanese industry was very good at this. But East Asia lagged in its own consumption because, again, the point was to suppress consumption in order to lead to high personal savings. High personal savings would then generate surplus that could be invested in economic development. This is not terribly different from communist models of growth. I'm going to say communist. I should specifically mention Soviet and Soviet communist. China, by the way, did the same as a complete disaster under Mao, and then rather successfully post Mao. And again, this is not exactly capitalism versus socialism thing, because the East Asian developmental states were very anti-communist. And conversely, for example, in Latin America, neither the right-wing regimes nor the left-wing regimes engage in this kind of suppression of consumption. So actually quite a lot of neoliberalism comes from the lessons of Latin America and the need to get outside investment in your economy in order to grow. Because Latin America is undercapitalized. This was never going to happen for the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, first of all, people disliked it ideologically, and second, the Soviet Union canceled the debt at the revolution on the ground that the Tsar, as an illegitimate ruler, had no right to bind future generations or something. And so the Soviet Union looked for outside loans. It did not get any, and had to develop autarkically. And this involved suppression of consumption, and under Stalin, this also involved genocide. Essentially because they needed to export Ukrainian surplus, but the suppression of consumption remained. It was an important feature of communism that led to quite a lot of academic. That also I don't know if it's led to. I shouldn't say led to, but it was connected, I think, with certain academic leftist critiques that viewed capitalism as very frivolous, as a kind of rat race, as kind of consumerist society, and this is a kind of critique that persists to this day, and was very nurtured in the New Left. For example, 1960s protesters were big on anti-consumerism. So the idea is that consumerism is frivolous, and the idea that consumerism is what makes for American greatness or something is silly. And so consumer good, and now the Soviet Union knew that it was underproducing consumer goods. It didn't think this was frivolous. It thought that it was a lower priority than being able to match NATO in various races, like the space race. But the point I'm making is that there was a lot of suppression of consumption. Whether it was viewed as consumer goods never or as consumer goods in the future, it doesn't really matter. They did not have consumer goods. And this includes cars. I think that even to this day, in places like the US or in Germany, people still view cars as consumer goods. So yes, so when people say, well, I need a car to work, I need a car to work, there are always these people, but scratch them and they will start telling you how much they enjoy driving and how it's nice that they can get anywhere. It's consumption, it's consumer politics. And I bring all this up because it means that the world of the late 40s, early 50s was a world in which, again, outside the United States, there wasn't mass car ownership. So how did people get around? By train or streetcar. And if they couldn't go by train or streetcar, maybe because it wasn't available where they were, then they would go by bus. And then the question is, what do you do afterward? So in Western Europe, the consumer society meant that cars did become a thing. So there was investment in both cars and in trains. It's cars and trains urbanism. A lot of it continues to this day, to be honest. So I keep talking about low construction costs and how they've helped Spain build, how they've helped Spain build massive subway systems with so much fast growth in the Madrid metro. But their low construction costs are also for freeways, and they're also investing too much money in urban freeways in Spain. And of course, and nowadays it's kind of political in that freeway investment is kind of a right-wing anti-environmentalist thing. But it's a thing that's happening. And this was not even controversial, I think, in Western Europe in the 1950s. This also included removing the streetcars because the streetcars were viewed as the past. Now, in the United States, the streetcars were gone for good. In France, same thing. In Germany, it's different. In Germany, they removed streetcars from city centers by burying them into subway surface networks, Stadtbahn systems. This was an invention technically from the United States in Boston at the very end of the 1890s. And then Philadelphia did the same thing, where it was one line each. And then at scale, it's something that Germany began with Köln in the 1960s. Köln's actually, I'm not going to zoom in on Köln actually, because Köln is kind of, because it's a larger system, it's very messy. Through Dortmund, just because it's a cleaner one that I might be able to depict on Google Earth without so much hassle. So the way Dortmund looks, don't look at the thick black lines with the train station. I can look at the ones with the U for U-Bahn. So you might be able to see how here they have these outlines of a railway, and here, and there's also one here. So in Dortmund, they buried the streetcars into three lines, which go across the city. At both ends, each line goes on the surface and then branches into multiple lines that go in all directions. So this is what Western Europe did. Because the idea was that city center should, be accessible by train. It's normal to take a train, but it should also be accessible by car because there's this aspiration that everyone should have a car. The result has been mass automobility, suburbanization of jobs, and so on. And the Eastern Bloc did not go through any of that. But again, this is specifically a matter of the Eastern Bloc not having a lot of consumer goods. Why is it relevant? Because today, too, we have a tradition in Western Europe, an emerging tradition of how not to build a city for cars. And what is it? What is this tradition? It is also a consumer tradition. It is a tradition that views a walkable city as a consumption amenity, as something that's inherently nice. And this is where you're getting things like low traffic neighborhoods. This is where Paris. Let me see if I can find the Paris low traffic zone. A rather large. So these are old things. Paris. Let's see if I can find something that literally just happened. Okay, good. So in Paris, for example, I'm not going to look at my messages on screen. It took a decent chunk of city center and banned people from driving unless they have a special reason, like if it's a truck doing deliveries or if there's a disability claim. But you can't just randomly drive a car. So this is an example of an urban planning tradition that's emerging, which is a kind of, I want to say green consumer urbanism, but Anne Hidalgo is not a green. She's a social, in fact, I mean, it's a socialist party. I would call her a social democrat because of how the party names are mapped here, but she's not green is the point. She's center left with socialist heritage. But again, this is a kind of consumer politics. The idea of the city, this is supposed to be a nice area where you should not be burdened by car pollution. And this is also related to how one designs streets. So the idea is that the street should be activated for pedestrians. So this means if you're building new streets like this, you probably should not be building streets that are too wide. And this is not something that is done in Europe because the cities are all old. But in Japan, even from a cars and trains tradition, from a different angle that you might see here, I'm going to zoom in on a random part of Tokyo that I do not know in advance what it would look like, but I know what Tokyo streets are like. So I'm going to go, let's say, in this area, so somewhere between Kokubenji and Tatikawa. And yeah, it just looks like how you would expect a dense urban street, maybe not city center. But something that might not be very obvious is these are not wide streets. So you might say this more as we're zooming. So here I have this randomly chosen street in suburban Tokyo. And this is a main street. And look how narrow it is. It's 10 meters. Now, in Tokyo, they're still building like this. Now, in Europe, they're not. But the old parts of the city are. I mean, if you've been a tourist anywhere in a European city center, you must have seen these rather narrow historic streets. Now, not everywhere. Some streets have been widened. Paris famously did that, but not all streets have been widened, so there's a mix. And it's often the case that these rather narrow pedestrian-scale three-car streets are pleasant. Rue de Rosière, for example, let me see if I can find it on Google without having to look too closely. That's the main drag of Le Marais, the one that's full of Israeli restaurants that are rather tourist trappy. It's not Al Shiv. It's too close to this one. It doesn't help that because this one. Yeah. It doesn't help that it's so Israeli that I call it Occupation Street. And yes, I will defend the claim they're not purely Jewish. They have Hebrew on the menus. So this is very active commercial street. Again, it's not clear on the map, and it's not something you can just see on Google Earth because the way the buildings look the way the buildings look from above in Paris is highly uniform regardless of how central the area is. So I need to just tell you that I lived there. I mean, not literally in this neighborhood, but I lived in the city. I went here quite a lot for severely overpriced falafel, and there are places here that have lines. So this random place would be 6 meters building to building. This is 10, very spacious. And so it's streets that are not automobile scale. And again, this is kind of a consumer mentality. I mean, they were not built out of this consumer mentality. They were built because this is a medieval street. I mean, the medieval city limit, the medieval city limit of Paris included Le Marais, as far as I remember. And that is how people built them. But it is pleasant now because people realize, oh yeah, this is pedestrian scale. This is nice. And I bring all this up because Eastern European low traffic cities were never built like this because this was never about consumer politics. Again, the notion of consumer politics, first of all, is new left, and the Soviet Union did use a lot of new left rhetoric. So if you're wondering why your Eastern European friends find your social justice rhetoric annoying, it's because the Soviet Union, while being thoroughly old left, used quite a lot of new left rhetoric, and so especially at the intellectual level, all to justify Soviet stagnation and random war crimes. So in Moscow, let's look at the streets right now. So you might note that you can even see on the map that there are very wide streets there, and the side streets are maybe narrower. But let's go outside city center for a moment, in a very random direction. I don't know Moscow very well. I know the shape of its subway network. I do not know the city very well, but you might notice that. So first of all, we have these very wide streets. And I say very wide. I mean, they can go wider, right? I mean, so this is 30. Let's look at building to building, maybe 39 meters, or I can't exactly tell because of the way like you see the way that it's tilted at an angle, so I'm not certain. So maybe it's 32 and not 39. 32 is pretty wide. And yeah, the streets behind are narrower, but they're not narrow. And so these are streets that were built for cars, essentially, without the cars. And you sometimes even see this from pictures of North Korea, where they have these giant freeways and no cars to fill them, because infrastructure is production. So they built this production. So they built these production facilities, but then they don't have consumer goods to fill them. So this is a very communist thing. And so from this, so with this history, because even though they built, so I'm pointing out in Eastern Europe that under communism, built cities that are rather car-oriented in how the streets look. Again, very wide, and at the same time does not have cars. So they instead build public transport. And in the major cities, they build large systems. And we need to talk about how they built them, because there is a specific Soviet bloc way of building public transport that is worth learning from. So this is something that I'm sure there's a professional name for, but I haven't found it. So I keep calling it the Soviet triangle. And I'm actually going to not depict Moscow for this because Moscow's system is too big, and also its first 3 lines look rather weird. So let's instead look in Prague. Prague has a 3-line system. It was built during the Cold War. And 3 lines, I don't know if I'm going to be able to see the shape of the lines. If not, I'm just going to hop on Wikipedia for that. Or on Alexander Rock's site, actually, might be better. So I don't want Paris. It's Prague PRG. Or PR. Yeah, PRG. So there are 3 lines. They meet in city center in a triangle. And they go, and they're vaguely radial. Now, there aren't a lot of ex-Soviet cities or ex-Soviet bloc cities that have more than 3 lines. 3 lines is a rather large number. Prague has that. It's a metro area of, I think, 2.5 million. Stockholm has 3, which, unlike Prague, meet at one central station. Stockholm is a metro area of 2.5 million. It is this central station in Moscow. So the pink color is regional rail, which also meets at the same, which also meets us at the same central station. So for example, Kiev, I believe only has 3 lines, and it's building the 4th right now. Kiev is 3.5 million. So where's Kiev here? And again, it's the same thing. 3 lines, city center, they meet in a triangle. It is a repeating pattern throughout the former Soviet bloc. Whenever you have at least 3 lines. If you don't, then it may look a little different. Pyongyang only has 2 lines. Yeah. The river is so Kiev has a very wide river, but even then, the current shape of the system doesn't look like there's a river. Now, the way they're planning to extend Kiev, and I will talk about it in a little bit, is yes, it's trying to build on it's trying to create a coherent wrong side network, in the same way of London or Paris. But right now, this is how Kiev looks. So at any rate, they never meet at the same place except in Moscow by accident, and this led to so much overcrowding at the one central station that they built a circle line just to encourage people to transfer elsewhere. And also they built many more lines, and they try to make sure that they meet at different stations, all in or just outside city center. So the lines are radial, and at this point I have to show you Moscow, just because this is kind of like the end game of such a big system. Now in Moscow, I do want to warn that some lines have mixed connections, so sometimes lines cross without an intersection. This is another important Soviet aspect, which China, by the way, still has, even though China is also mostly radial, but it has more variations, especially in Beijing. But the interstation is very wide. So, for example, this line, the brown line sign 5, it's the circle line. I'm pretty sure all of its stations are just these intersection points. So you see the other line, and you see the other lines, they all pass through city center. For the most part, they cross once. So these 2 lines, I'm forgetting their numbers, cross multiple times, but it's unusual. Usually 2 lines cross once. I don't think there are any parallel lines here. So again, it's a system that's designed very much to bring people into the center, and if they're going between 2 non-central areas, they should transfer in the center or on the circle. So again, it's a very monocentric view of the city, because they didn't think in terms of polycentricity. Polycentricity is kind of this creation of the post-war world, which was justified. Borners, I will get back to you in a second. So polycentricity was a post-war creation, designed. In the United States, it was sold as a security measure, because maybe the Soviet Union is going to nuke New York. So let's move all the corporate HQs out of New York and disperse them across suburbs. Now, this is bullshit. And here's how we know this was bullshit. In the Soviet Union, which was as paranoid about security as the United States, this never happened. Think about it. If the Soviet Union is going to launch a nuclear strike on the United States, do you think it's going to be particularly relevant whether the head office of General Electric and it has been destroyed because it's in 30 Rock, or is it spared because it's in Fairfield, Connecticut, but the entirety of the rest of the United States has been trashed? No, it doesn't matter. So the actual thing that happened is that there's a process of suburbanization of jobs, which goes roughly like this. Rich people move somewhere. And this place, if it's a specific suburban wedge, is called the favored quarter. And New York is a large, complex city, and it is divided by water in many directions. And so instead of having one favored quarter, like in Berlin and in London and Paris, it's all the same favored quarters going roughly west, maybe a little more southwest in all three cities. And in New York, there are several favored wedges. And the job suburbanization for these HQs tended to be in one wedge, which was one going north along what is now Metro North to Westchester in Connecticut. So the rich people move, then the CEO also moves, and then the CEO looks for excuses to move to move the corporate HQ close to where he always never actually lives. So it's this area. So General Electric moved to Fairfield, which is here, and IBM moved to Armonk, which is somewhere around here, but I never remember exactly where. Here, okay. All same favorite quarter, and a lot of important functions end up being suburbanized. Like a lot of the tech research was not in the city, but was in various parts of Jersey, with various parts of central Jersey. And then Silicon Valley happened in the suburbs. So a lot of it came from rich people moved to a place, and then maybe high-end retail chases rich people, and jobs chase high-end retail, or sometimes jobs just chase rich people. And to the extent that this has been reversing in the United States to some extent, it's because a lot of rich people are back in the city. And so, for example, General Electric, I believe, moved its corporate HQ to Boston because suddenly there are lots of rich people who live, I mean, yes, in some of the suburbs of Boston, all over here, but also within Boston and within Cambridge. And so, compared with them, I mean, yeah, that you can make them drive in the wrong direction, but that's a chore. So instead, you move to a place like here, or you move to Kendall Square with all the big tech firms. And so this is a process that relies on high-income suburbanization. And one of the reasons I think it has not, so one of the reasons it has not happened in Europe is just better planning on making sure that suburban jobs that do exist are near train stations. But also, the aspects of white flight have just not happened here. Nor did they happen in the Eastern Bloc. And so yes, there were. Yes, so they had all these industry cities in the middle of nowhere where they would just build a city and tell people to move there. That is absolutely a thing they did. But within the and I will point something out that I don't know to what extent it's relevant, but think about it. Moscow is about the same size as Paris or London. Metro area, I mean. But Russia is larger than the United Kingdom and France combined. So so the capital city is just much smaller as a share of the population. It's not because Russia is highly federal or anything. It isn't. It was not in Soviet times. I mean, it was vaguely federal within the 15 republics, but even then, not really. And the Russians and all of the and it's not like these were like different zones of Russia. No, Russia was one of the 15 federal states. It was highly centralized. It still is highly centralized. There's no real autonomy for any of the outlying parts of Russia. So you should expect it to end up maybe the size of Tokyo, right? Because Tokyo is the dominant capital of a highly centralized state with about the same population as Russia. But no, Moscow is much smaller. So there is this kind of let's call it American style. I don't know what to call it, disconnection or breaking in that in that different parts of the economy are at different levels of centrality. So in the United States, it's not because so in the United States it's because of NIMBYism in the big cities. The situation is that you may have a high-end HQ that picks the center of New York, Chicago, Boston, San Francisco, Washington if it's related to the government. But then all of the outlying jobs will be not even in the exurb of the same city, but all over America. And the reason is that the big cities are too expensive because of NIMBYism. Now, in East Asia, they just ignored the NIMBYs and built enough that they can put everything in the main city. And part of Soviet urbanism was they didn't actually ever do that. So in Soviet urbanism, there was very little reuse. And so so there was just a ring of projects that Stalin built, then behind it a ring of projects that Khrushchev built, and then behind it a ring of projects that that Brezhnev built, and there wasn't and there was never any kind of replacement. So this is another feature of communism that is not, I think, very well known. And you might, by the way, even notice here that just from the map, you can kind of see this is kind of a mid-rise, kind of very traditional urbanism, and you could say, oh, right, of course, traditional dense urbanism, that's nice, but remember, this is not how Soviet planners, or modernist planners in general, thought. Modernist planners thought that this was trash, and the future should look more like this. But they didn't do this kind of mass demolition and replacement, because this is just not how the Soviet economy worked. And this is, in general, also something that is true of, let's say, Soviet businesses. You would expect a top-down place would be able to tell workers at an unproductive factory, we're going to liquidate the factory, it is unproductive. We're socialists, we're not going to send the workers on the streets, we're going to retrain all the workers to work at 10 different industries that are more successful. But this never happened. There was never any of this kind of replacement under communism. So there were quite a lot of zombie industries. And likewise, there was never any kind of replacement of the city beyond, let's say, so there was slum demolition for projects, don't get me wrong, and especially if and there was a lot of rebuild in very heavily devastated cities. So at least my impression when I was in Prague is that Prague never had that, because I guess it was never heavily damaged, but Warsaw was. But I'm going to actually not look at Warsaw, but at East Berlin, just because I know it better. So literally here in Friedrichshain, a neighborhood where I literally just went earlier today to print my protest sign for the Ukraine protest. This is how they made the main street of East Berlin look. Frankfurt It used to be named after Stalin. Like you don't even need to show it to you on the map. I don't even need to measure for you to see that this is an incredibly wide modernistic street. One that was very car friendly to the point that they've done a lot of that. To the point that they've had to do a lot to make it even nice to walk on. So, for example, a lot of it is actually at this point not cars, but lawns and then walkways. So there aren't actually that many car lanes. But objectively speaking, this is a very wide street. This is this is how it was supposed to be built. This is how a city center was supposed to look like. But it wasn't due to demolition. It was due to destruction caused by the war. And so, for example, in areas that were less devastated in the Battle of Berlin, like Prenzlauer Berg, the other near center East Berlin neighborhood, it's incredibly traditional, actually. The like Pennsylvania is, I think, actually the best preserved pre-war Berlin neighborhood because of this. So yeah, so they did urban renewal, but but it was not even in a place like Pennsylvania. So it wasn't even at the scale of residential area that's close to city center. It was instead the very center. So things like Alexanderplatz, that was renewed, or a main street where a lot of stuff had already been destroyed, that was absolutely renewed. And like was with Warsaw, was rebuilt that way. But most of the but most of the housing, for example, yeah, there was a little bit here, but most of the East Berlin housing projects were outside were outside the center. And how would they be connected to the center? Well, not by car, because East Germany, nobody has a car. I mean, yes, you can, but you can ask for a Trabi, you will get it in 15 years. So how is it built? It's on trams. So the key feature here is that it's still visible. So the thing is, then in 1990, communism bites the dust, and everyone gets cars, and people realize, oh well, oh wait, these streets are really wide, and we can drive through them. That's awesome. And it gets to the point that the cities that were not big enough to get subway systems became car oriented like this. The public transit ridership in the smaller cities is just very bad. I want to check Tallinn, but I believe that, so Tallinn is a metro area of what, 600? So the city is 400. The region is a little bit bigger than that. I don't remember how big. And let me see how many. So Tallinn has public transport. It even has trams and trolleybuses. And Tallinn was briefly mentioned in international media on transport because it has a fare-free system. But it's in context of, you're not telling me how many, I want to say there are about 40 million riders a year, but okay, I'm going to have to try to go in Estonian, which is going to be a problem because Estonian is like a less readable version of Finnish, and Finnish is not the world's easiest language to pretend that I speak. You're not telling me how many. Okay. Okay. If I can't find Tallinn, let's try to do Vilnius. I'm steering clear of Riga. Riga is a little bit bigger. Riga actually is technically the largest municipality in both the Baltics and the Nordic countries, just because the city limits are wider than those of obviously actually larger Stockholm and Copenhagen. No, I don't care about your music right now. Transport, public transport. Okay, so they're saying it's 500,000 passengers, so 180, which is very high. Okay, they're saying that nothing happened. Yeah. So even in a city like this, maybe it's a little more, but quite often we're talking about tramway systems that have. So the trolley buses have 200,000 riders, which is not actually that much. And again, when I'm saying smaller, when I'm saying all but the largest cities, I don't just mean Moscow. So Vilnius has kind of held up. Brno, for example, has one of the world's busiest tramway systems. And Tony will tell you in comments how much of a cowtown Brno is. But there was a lot of people. Yeah, so people were moving from the city to the suburbs, but to the suburban housing project. But it was not. But it was not that at least in the way it worked in Prenzlauer is that the housing projects were built in the suburbs to replace overcrowded and very low amenity, like without hot water, inner city tenements like here. But it's not that they demolished this to make this modernist. No, they just told people, okay, these are kind of depreciated buildings. Don't live here anymore. Go move here. This is how East Berlin rolled. And so these buildings were all renovated after communism fell. And yeah, there was a big move to the suburbs, but it wasn't like, I mean, again, this is possibly the best preserved part of inner Berlin, just because it was neglected. So the idea of modernizing it, i.e., big buildings, car-oriented streets, was not happening. So again, there are metro systems in the big cities. Importantly, there's a lot of legacy communist integration of where housing goes and where the transport and the public transport goes. Something that I must say is not exclusively communist, because Copenhagen and Stockholm did the same. Under thoroughly capitalist governments, they just built the public housing on top of metro stations. So let's look at Stockholm for a moment, just because so Stockholm is not generally an Eastern style system at all. Stockholm, for example, removed the streetcars. Eastern Europe did not remove the streetcars, and this includes even the parts of Germany that were communist. So Leipzig has a large tramway system. So like Leipzig, I believe, has 140 million, maybe, or 20. I checked this before, so this is, in fact, I showed it in my video on trams. Leipzig, how many riders are there here? Okay, not 140, 120. Yeah, 120 million riders a year, which is not that much less than systems that actually buried things underground. And Leipzig is not a large city. Dresden has this. East Berlin has this. And yeah, they always struggle, and it was always a shortage, and the quality of these projects was terrible. So Stephen Smith, for example, tells me that in Romania, the housing projects were made of cinder as opposed to solid bricks, and so these became termite superhighways, and so everyone had termites, and you could complain about termites, but nobody was going to do anything about it. So there was a kind of poison that everyone was supposed to buy and pour it wherever they saw termites. And some relative of his, I don't remember who, ended up dying because they accidentally confused the poison for the termites with the booze that they were drinking, and they drank the poison. So I'm not saying this was high housing quality or anything, whereas in Stockholm, my understanding is that the housing quality of the project is actually pretty high. People complain that they're depressing, that the urbanism is bad, or people complain that they are far from jobs, but it's not the same as there are termites in the building. So you can kind of see how in Stockholm, the stuff that's on trains is gray, and the stuff that's between the trains is green, and again, Copenhagen is doing the same with commuter rail, called the Finger Plan. It's very good, and this is how Stockholm has very high transit usage for not a very large city, just like the cities of Eastern Europe. And again, it's a system, it's different, and again, the shape of the metro network in Stockholm is very different. A lot of branching, which is uncommon in Eastern Europe. The distances between the stations are much narrower. Eastern Europe, following Stockholm, has wide interstations. And unlike in, let's say, London or Tokyo, the interstations stay wide even in city center, which makes it hard for lines that cross to be guaranteed a connection if the system is big enough. Whereas in Tokyo, it's also like that for different reasons, but in London, actually, they never miss connections, with one exception, which is the Metropolitan line and the Charing Cross half of the Northern line. The other lines, whenever they meet in city center, they have transfer. When they have missed connections, it's other than that one, it's suburban stuff, like a bunch of lines that are weaving around each other, and they don't always meet, and they don't always have a transfer. And they build very deep. It's also a very important feature, which is not unique to Moscow. They picked it up from London. But So we have all these features of the Soviet system. They have triangles rather than one central station, which is again very good as a way of eliminating eliminating bottlenecks in transfers. Moscow, because its triangle is imperfect, and at one station the first three lines all meet, that led to severe overcrowding. And so Stockholm lacks its features. Copenhagen barely even has a metro; it's mostly commuter rail. But they managed to get the integration with, or they managed to get the integration right with housing, and this is really important, and more places need to understand that. Now, I'm not saying this is kind of one hidden trick. Nobody west of the Oder has heard of this bullshit. No, people west of the Oder have heard of this. Paris is doing it not amazing but decent job at it. And and in Berlin, they're vaguely trying to steer growth in Brandenburg to be near the S-Bahn. The problem is that Brandenburg has kind of its own identity, which is we're not Berlin. And so there's a lot of annoyance at this, but at the end of the day, nobody wants to be in Brandenburg except get to Berlin, so it's kind of happening organically. Ooh, so are they okay? Now I got to ask if these Plattenbaus are better in quality, because my impression is that the East German Plattenbauen are actually decent in quality, but I guess they were all renovated, especially on the outside. They have very nice cladding, but the cladding is all post Cold War renovation. And of course, the Plattenbau are not purely Eastern or Scandinavian thing either. I must depict Gropiusstadt because it's very pretty. It's also good urbanism besides being pretty. I mean, there's space between the buildings. It is not used for cars. You can bike on the path that is right above where U7 goes. It's kind of nice. There's not this station, but this station. Lipschitz Allee. This is like a little neighborhood center with a Turkish supermarket. I imagine when it was built, it was not intended to be a Turkish supermarket. With some small retail around here. There's a library here. There's a couple more things I'm forgetting about. There's the office of the local, I think, SPD politician. So this is kind of how you want to build suburban housing when it's integrated with public transit. So you want the community center areas to be right on top of the train station, and then you want to build high-rise buildings that are surrounding that. Now, this is a rather contiguous high-rise area. It's a very large development project for a large city. In Stockholm, they will be smaller, but they will be somewhat more compactly spread around each of the stations. So they're going to be. So if it were Stockholm, you would see something much smaller than this here and here, but you would see these repeat at many other stations as opposed to just once citywide here and then once citywide at the other end of this. By the way, is West Berlin, not East Berlin. I mean, modernism was not unique to Eastern Europe. And the other end is right here, with one important difference. Here, they never bothered expanding the subway. They are dithering on doing so as we speak. The subway gets here. They did a study that showed that this would not be expensive. It would cost, I want to say, 14,000 maybe euros per weekday rider, so not much of a problem. And now they're deferring this behind city center tramway expansion and expanding the U-Bahn to the airport. Priorities. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So part of it, so there's a lot of manufactured home technology, which is again not unique to communism. The United States had that as well. The United States had manufactured homes in the 50s and 60s, and then it stopped having them because it was putting all the construction workers out of business, and the construction workers were annoyed. Actually, the United States the United States has had net decreases in construction productivity in the last 30 years. I believe Germany has been flat. Yeah. So and so these are for panels that you then make a house. Again, there are other technologies for this. Just that it's just that this was deployed at mass scale in the Eastern Bloc, and so the first feature is this kind of integration, which I'm going to stress again. This was maybe more complete in Eastern Europe, but not unique to it. And second is the retention of trams, and this is the power move. Now, let's go to Warsaw for a moment, and why why Warsaw as opposed to any other city. The reason is that Warsaw has a very underbuilt metro for how big it is. Metropolitan Warsaw has 3 million people. Among the Eastern European cities that are in the EU, I believe the only bigger one is Budapest. I believe it goes Budapest at 3.5, Warsaw 3. Actually, maybe Bucharest is also around 3. Prague is 2.5, and then there's Upper Silesia. Upper Silesia is in theory 3, but it's horrifically polycentric, and it's all mining towns. So this is actually the most auto-oriented part of urban Poland because there's no big city center here. There are inter-urban streetcars connecting all these city centers, but it's very unlikely that someone is working in Katowice city center. It's much more likely that people are working at a random factory in, I don't know, Chorzów, Bytom, Gliwice, Wrocławska, Sosnowiec. So, not Sosnowiec, Sosnowiec. So these are very, and now we're seeing the transition of working class jobs from industry and mining to services. That's very polycentric, which one of my friends here explains to me as, yeah, there might be someone who lives in Gliwice who gets hired to clean a house in Bytom, and there might be someone in Bytom who gets hired to clean a house in Gliwice. And this is not very efficient, and they should probably swap, but the technology for such a swap does not exist for now, and so, yeah. So they drive. And so as a monocentric city center at any rate, it's Warsaw. Again, except that it's behind Budapest. I don't know if it's around Bucharest. Warsaw only has 2 lines. And so you can kind of see the 2 lines here. Line. There's also commuter rail. I don't know how modernized it is. I don't think anywhere in Eastern Europe do they have something that works quite like an S-Bahn or an RER or Suburbanization or the Stockholm commuter rail. They have a few near misses. Budapest, I believe, has very frequent high-powered commuter rail, but it does not run through. I'm forgetting if they have a through-running project or if it's only a through-running project that I created or that other rail fans created. It's important to have this running infrastructure. I just don't think they use it as an S-Bahn. Or if they do, I mean, look at the development here. Whereas the metro has more development. That said, the metro in Warsaw is underbuilt. Again, it's 2 lines in a very large city. Prague is a smaller city and has 3. Budapest has 4. So, thankfully in Warsaw, I can tell you the ridership by mode. So you might note something. There's more ridership on the tramways in Warsaw than on the metro. The metro again is underbuilt, but and the commuter rail also. Like these are the commuter rail systems. They're kind of and then there's the trams. This is one of the busiest tramway systems in the world. This is one of the busiest tramway systems in the world. I believe it goes St. Petersburg, which is just shy of 400, then Budapest, which is also just shy of 400. Paris, I believe, maybe it's Prague then Paris, or Paris then Prague. They're, I don't know, mid 300s or something like that. I think it's these four and maybe then Warsaw. I think Warsaw is number 5 in the world. So because of this retention of trams, and because there's a strong city center, not because there's been the construction of a purpose-built CBD. Now, there are high-rises in Warsaw, don't get me wrong. This building, Stalinist architecture, this was, I believe when it was built, it was the tallest in Europe. But there's just a very intact city center, even though, again, a lot of it is rebuilt post-war. And so the jobs never left city center. And with that, and with construction of housing projects that were at least somewhat oriented around where the streetcar go, and where the not streetcar like it's London, where the streetcars go, or the buses. The result is that it's just a very transit efficient city. So the ridership is very high. Yeah, I've not actually seen the expansion plan. I only saw the expansion plan for the first line. I don't even know if they're planning a third line. But the point is that this is a metro area of 3 million people with an underbuilt metro and rail ridership, pretending that the buses don't exist for a moment, even though they do. It's something like 200 per capita a year. And then there are the buses. And the buses are not just rail feeders. So the model split in Warsaw is very good. 57% of the non-pedestrian journeys in Warsaw are on public transport. And this, if anything, understates the model split, because public transport, and this is a problem with doing all trips. Usually, when you do a trip by car, you will do many trips by car. Let's pretend that the trip that I took today were a car trip. I would be driving to the copy shop. I mean, probably would have a printer in home if I needed to do that all the time. But I would be driving to the copy shop to print protest sign. Drive copy shop to Pariser Platz. Drive Pariser Platz home. So 3 car trips. But I'm a transit user. I walked to the copy shop. So it's only 2 transit trips. And so usually if you do work trips, you're going to get a higher, like generally when you do work trips, you're going to see a much lower model split for walking and biking, and a much higher model split for and a much higher model split for transit, and then cars tend to be a wash. So here we have in Warsaw a pretty hefty majority, when you restore pedestrians, a pretty hefty majority of Warsavians do not drive. And I want to make something very clear about what's the plan for Metro Line 3? Yep, they are drunk. But it will point. But again, the drunkenness. I mean, Kiev. They also have in Kiev. They also have rather drunk plans. So we need to talk about them in a moment. About wrong side of the river type investment. Something that I don't remember if I ever blogged it. If I haven't, I should. It's relevant to a number of cities: New York, the wrong side of the river. Actually, 2 wrong sides of the river: the Jersey side and the Brooklyn Queens side. London, it's South London. Paris, it's the left bank. Warsaw, it is the right bank of the Wisła. Kiev would be the left bank of the Dnieper. And so I bring all this up because there's this mentality that you only ride public transit if you're too poor for a car. And there's an opposite mentality, which is you only ride public transit if you're so rich you can live in the ritzy city. And these kind of stereotypes, these are rural stereotypes that are against the city, and they coexist. Sometimes even in the same culture in the United States, both of these exist. I don't know if both of them exist in Germany and France writ large, or if the stereotype. So in France, both stereotypes I just mentioned to you exist, but I think they exist in different environments. So I think that the lol you ride the trains, what a pauper stereotype is specific to suburban Paris, and the oh you ride trains, you're so rich you can afford to live in Paris stereotype is from outside Ile-de-France, is my understanding. In the United States, sometimes they coexist in the same exurbs or the same suburbs. Uh, okay, yeah, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Yeah. So so I bring up these stereotypes because um, so the Soviet Union and its satellites build a system in which there are very wide roads, very car friendly, but there are no cars. Then communism relieves the world of its presence, and people start being able to get cars. But wait a moment, we're talking about post-communism. This is a 1990s thing, right? And now the 1990s in most of Eastern Europe are a rather shitty time. Um, Now it's not uniform. Um, so I'm pretty sure that every single Eastern European country has a recession in the early 90s, and then they recover. No, I don't want military expenditure. So let's do Russia, Ukraine. Let's not do Belarus. Poland, Czechia, Slovakia. Um, let's do Lithuania and Romania. I think it's a pretty representative set of examples. Um, so note that, that literally the only countries that we're not seeing crash in the early 90s are the ones where the data does not go as far as the early 90s. So Slovakia starts from 1992, which is already where it was hitting bottom. Um, and Lithuania it only starts 1995, so same thing. Now Ukraine does the worst. Because it's topical, I want to pause for a moment with public transit and explain why Ukraine has had the worst economic performance pretty much in, I think it's Ukraine, maybe Serbia or something. And the situation in Ukraine is like this. Ukraine was the most, so Ukraine had a very weird position in the Soviet Empire, which is that it was very, so in terms of culture, it was periphery in the sense that there were forced Russification programs, again, the Holodomor. But other than that, post-war, the post-war Russian-dominated Soviet government kind of treated Ukraine as part of the Soviet core, and the same is true of Belarus. So even though there was a lot of suppressed resentment, and then when communism fell, a rather large majority of Ukrainians, and that even includes a large majority of East Ukrainians, voted for independence. It was part of the Soviet economic core, and what do we know about the Soviet economy? It was inefficient with all the zombie industries. And the zombie industries, this included the military production. These happened to be disproportionately in Ukraine. Yeah, the EU membership is relevant, but it is not the entire thing. Ukraine, Russia. Russia is literally twice as rich as Ukraine, and this was not the case 30 years ago. So yes, the EU membership has helped a lot, and much of it was the prep for EU membership, so realigning institutions with European norms. That's the soft power that Europe had in the 90s and 2000s, and which, by the way, it still has. It just refuses to use it. And so the history of Ukraine is that Ukraine was incredibly militarized. 30% of Soviet military production was there. This was not a kind of deliberate attempt to stick the bill for post-Soviet collapse to Ukraine. The sort of people who made these siting decisions did not think that the Soviet economy was a zombie economy. There were people, even in the 1980s, who understood that the Soviet economy wasn't borrowed time and was a zombie economy. My understanding from reading Russia watchers on Twitter and like historians, for example, of Russia, is that the KGB actually understood pretty well. So the reason that Putin, a KGB officer, became the leader is that he understood the economic limits of communism early, as did many KGB people, so they jumped ship to various post-Soviet politicians early, as I understand it. But again, they were not. It was not a deliberate thing. It just happened that Soviet militarization, so the zombie industries, were disproportionately in Ukraine. So the collapse was bigger. Then the recovery was about the same as in Ukraine and in Russia, and then there was weakness following the financial crisis, which was not unique to Ukraine. And then after 2014, it was kind of difficult to grow for such reasons as Russia literally invaded parts of Ukraine. So people keep saying that, oh, maybe you should not invest there, you should not go there. The main reaction of various Western governments to further Russian aggression is to tell their citizens to leave Ukraine and to stop flying to Kiev, rather than to say that they're going to stand with Ukraine. So when you're in this position where people don't know if the country will exist or not, yeah, it suppresses investment. By the way, Taiwan too. Taiwan has it has a very good economy. Remember, it's East Asian suppression of consumption for which created a lot of domestic capital. But Taiwan's not getting foreign capital. Taiwan has a very weak currency for how rich it is. And the United States is accusing it of currency manipulation, but the United States is at the same time openly gaming scenarios in which Taiwan will cease to exist. So yeah, maybe people don't think it's a good investment opportunity. And so this is the cause of the economic weakness in Ukraine now. But again, the 1990s, everyone like this again was worse in Russia than in the rest of Eastern Europe. But for example, look, Romania. Romania, here it's 13,302. Romania takes until 2002 to recover. And since then, Romania grows decently healthily. But and note something that so in this area, in this era, we have this era of economic weakness in Eastern Europe. Ukraine already had a per-year regime change in 2004, but the Russian and that was an era of recovery, but the Russian invasion was post-Maidan. And the other thing is, remember, the 2004 election was pretty close. In 2004, East Ukraine was pro-Russian. Post-2014, East Ukraine is split 50-50, and West and Central Ukraine are overwhelmingly pro-Western. It's a little bit like how I keep yelling into the ether on Twitter that the Democrats should pass to citizenship because they have the votes for it in the Senate, and it is a policy that Republicans are 50-50 on, and the Democrats are almost unanimously in favor. So it's the same thing. This is what Ukraine began. But oil is, I mean, you only get rich off of oil if you have a lot of it relative to population, aka if you're Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, or maybe Saudi Arabia. Russia just doesn't have. I mean, Russia has the same oil production roughly as Saudi Arabia on something like 4 times the population. So yeah, there's the manufacturing part, but I mean that's Poland as well. I mean, Poland is not as wealthy as Germany. It's just Poland is very hard converted. It's very hardly converted. Poland then, Poland now. And so I bring all this up because the 1990s are an era in which there's economic weakness. But this economic weakness doesn't mean everyone becomes equally poor. No, communism is ending and inequality is rising. There's a cadre of people who suddenly have money and can spend it. And I don't just mean the oligarchs, or I don't just mean the new Russians. I mean like a broader middle class. I mean, a middle class is maybe not as big. It's not the 30% of the population it is here, but you don't need to be 30% to be visible. You can be 10%, it's fine. And so there's a lot of spending on consumer goods, maybe not so much on infrastructure until the government can sort itself out. So you would expect that this era would lead to a lot of car-oriented changes because cars are a consumer item. So this is something I need to keep explaining to people over and over. Cars require more government spending as a system than public transit. However, in the presence of a weak government, you will have cars and not transit. And the reason is that cars don't require as much coordination. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that cars, yes, require a little bit more government spending on building and maintaining roads than trains do on building and running the system. But so much more extra stuff from cars is consumer goods, that a system with a lot of money in the private economy to spend on consumer goods and weak infrastructure will tilt toward cars. So yeah, they'll spend less government spending. There will be less government spending on cars than transit in a system with healthy public services, and as a result, there will be massive traffic jams, and as a result, people will sometimes say, give us trains, or they will say, widen the roads, and depending on the strength of the center versus local power brokers, it'll be one or the other. But when you have a lot of consumer goods, that encourages cars. And this is exactly what happened in the post-communist world. And so this is exactly what happened. There was not a lot of public investment, and this is despite the fact that the public investments that had been planned before, some of them were still going on. The railways did not shut down. The railways were one of the more functional parts of Eastern Europe and still are. So Moscow kept expanding, but the sort of system that would sustain, I don't know, Omsk or something, forget about it, or Tallinn, Riga. Riga had plans for a metro that just never happened. And now in the larger cities, there's a metro, and that's fine. If there's no metro, then that gets weaker, especially when cars are starting to compete with the streetcars. Streetcars that are designed for a system where cars exist. Let's call them the modern Parisian streetcar. Let's call them streetcars. The modern Parisian streetcars. They know how to coexist with cars, which means the city that builds them, in this case would be the Ile-de-France region, knows, okay, cars exist. The majority of the population of Ile-de-France owns cars. So we need to make sure that the tramway can compete with them. So what we're going to do, we're going to give the tramway dedicated lanes. We might even make these dedicated lanes nice. For example, a grassy median. So, for example, what I believe is the busiest single tramway in the world, T3 in Ile-de-France. It's on the outer margin of Paris. It's in a grassy median. So when you work like this, yeah, it doesn't matter how many cars there are. You already anticipate this, and you make sure that the system the system can handle them in advance. Now, traditional tramways, yeah, they were in the center lanes, but they didn't have dedicated lanes often, and the result is that as soon as there are cars, the system grinds to a halt. This is exactly what happened in the United States as soon as World War II ended. So World War II was also a period of very limited investment, but of course World War II is also a period of suppression of consumption. I believe American public transportation ridership peaks in absolute numbers in 1946 and has yet to recover. New York City, now I can tell you for a fact this was the New York City subway. It peaked in 1946 and has yet to recover. It's recovered, but not all the way up. But within very few years after this, after the war ends, yes, you can keep investing into the trains again, but suddenly all those people who moved to, for example, Los Angeles for war industries, they don't live near the streetcars, because this is housing that was built to house wartime workers. The streetcars were not extended. So in the war, they carpooled because gas was rationed, or maybe they took a bus, or they walked a long distance to get to the streetcar. And now the war is over, they can buy a car. And suddenly the cars and the streetcars are competing for space, and this destroys the American streetcars within a very small number of years. Now they were having problems even before the war, but this just destroys them. It's like I think it's a maybe 10-year shift, just destroyed the entire thing. And in the 1990s, yeah, so suddenly there's suburbanization that's not per a kind of plan. There's more home ownership. So Eastern Europe actually has high home ownership because because there was a plan of mass privatization, and some of the mass privatization plans flopped and created oligarchs. Like, I believe the way it worked in Russia is that the way Yeltsin set this up is that every Russian citizen got a voucher that could be spent on buying up state industries, but this was the economy of Russia at the time, so you can expect that in such a free fall situation, people were just going to sell the vouchers for whatever, and this is how oligarchs could get very large amounts of the world's resource production for amounts of money that, relative to the total production, are basically nothing. And so the housing situation was much easier. You didn't need to deal with vouchers. You just said, okay, you live in this public housing project, right? Congratulations, you're the proud owner of this apartment. Have fun. Yeah, exactly. But so there was this idea of selling these to the public, and my understanding is that Czechia also had a rather bad privatization experience, but which not Russia. But in Russia, like literally, what happened was that oligarchs would buy for very little money, or and then if there were companies that they didn't manage to buy, they used violence to steer these companies, to kind of to destroy these companies to create profit for the companies that the oligarchs did own. Yeah, it is a meme. Privatization very much is a meme, but the point is with housing, it wasn't a meme. Like these just became condos, the public housing project. And bring this up because, as I said, I'm going to talk about lessons from Eastern Europe, and these are going to actually be pretty positive lessons. I mean, yeah, communism sucked, and the mass privatizations that Yeltsin decided were the solution also sucked. But communism is dead. Yeltsin is dead. Let's talk about what's alive. Retention of tramways is very important. Prague and Budapest both have a tramway and metro system. I mean, so does Warsaw, but in Warsaw, the metro is underbuilt, and in Budapest and in Prague, it's not. Prague has a good metro. Prague also has good trams. From Prague, I mean, you sum the tramways and the metro in Prague, and it's something like what, 900 million riders a year, which is ridiculously high. I mean, Prague. I mean, I've seen different numbers on these also, which I think might be a linked, unlinked. So I've seen, so they're saying 590 million, but I've also seen numbers that are a lot lower, like 500. Why am I saying? Okay, now you're saying 584. Again, I believe that this is unlinked, so it double counts. Can we have a conversation about why I'm saying suggested language and none of them is the language that is actually used in Praga? Am I just blind and not saying Chishtina? Okay. Yeah, so they're saying 461 here. It's not an older number. It's linked versus unlinked trips. Yeah. I mean, there are always these kinds of very corrupt oligarchs like Babish, Poroshenko, Berlusconi, Trump. Just kind of annoying that people look at Berlusconi and Trump in courts and don't, or the CDU corruption scandals and immediately and say, oh yeah, yes, courts is corrupt. Oh yes, Spain is corrupt. And they never say, oh, all of Western Europe is corrupt. And then they look at Bobby and say, oh, all of Eastern Europe is corrupt. Anyway, this is 461. It's not 580 something. 580, I think it's with double counting transfers. Then let me check the great Trams and Prague. I don't want to do a list of tram. Do you want to do this to me again? Trams in Prague. By the way, you might notice that trams in Czechia exist in Praga, okay, Brno, Olomouc, Plzeň, Ostrava, and two cities I can't even find on the map. Liberec and Most. But anyway, in Praga, yeah, okay, so it's 370. It's actually ahead of Paris. 370 plus 480 equals 850. Praga is a metro area of 2.5, give or take. 850 by 2.5 is 340. To put this in perspective, Tokyo is 400. So Praga, through the system of this kind of Soviet-style triangle in the center, you put the housing projects vaguely near the railways, and you keep the trams, and you have a city center that's actually nice, and I said it's a total tourist. And you're getting rail ridership per capita that might actually be the number 2 in the world. And again, this is Praga. The smaller, the secondary cities in Czechia, I mean, they're not Praga, but I mean, Brno has, I think, 190 or 200 million tram trips a year in a metro area of 700,000. So you want to be this retentionist. You want to delay suburbanization of perhaps, oh, here's the correct. Okay, good to know. You don't want to be too polycentric, actually. This is something that happens in Silesia, and this is the legacy of mining towns and manufacturing towns. But in the same way that in Germany, the major metro area is the one with the highest car use and the lowest use of public transport is the Rhine-Ruhr, because it's a bunch of medium-sized cities together. And don't get me wrong, I mean, the central cities of the Rhine-Ruhr have decent public transport. I mean, you look at the ridership in Köln, in Düsseldorf, in Essen, in Dortmund, in Duisburg. It's healthy. It's just that in between them, you get things that are rather auto-oriented. And my understanding is it's the same here. The Katowice is fine, and then everything else is utopia. And but the others, I mean, Krakow, Wrocław. I keep thinking that Wrocław has an accent on the O, but it's not Wrocław. It's Wrocław, not Wrocław. Łódź and Krakow have pretty decent tramway networks, as I understand it. Warszawa, I have no idea about Gdańsk. Kiev, I mean, Kiev does not have amazing public transport ridership, but it has pretty good public transport ridership for a place that is poorer today than it was 30 years ago, and has suffered from severe underinvestment to the point that the rail trip times between Warsaw and Kiev, there's a night train that does this in 16 hours. If you want to take a day train, you can take a day train to Krakow and then to the border and then change trains, and then it's 14 hours. So from Przemysl, so from the border station, which is Przemysl, it's let me actually check this again because remember the total trip time. I don't remember how much of it is in Ukraine, but the point is that the intercity trains in Ukraine are shit. Now, bear in mind, Ukraine also has a actually an intact freight system. And then Kiev is how they're pronouncing Kiev in uh, Polish. 21, yeah, it's a weekday. Let's do morning and see what we see. Let's see what we're going to. So from Przasmysh to Kiev, it is 8 hours. Now, I don't know what the exact route taken is, so I imagine that drawing it is straighter than it is. But this is still, as a direct line, 560 kilometers. Yeah, that's 70 kilometers an hour. Again, maybe a bit more because it's actually because it is actually because it's actually not direct, but that's 70 kilometers an hour on an intercity train. And it's not like a random line connecting on important cities. The capital, it's the main line connecting the capital to Poland, I believe. Because the direct connection to Kiev is, not to Kiev, to Warsaw is the night train. So yeah, this should be one of the faster lines in Ukraine. That's how slow it is. So the point is that in a situation with not a lot of investment, they're squeezing good ridership out of the big city systems. And this is again is a good thing. It's essentially skipping everyone will own a car and live in a suburb in the suburbs with the white picket fence with 2.5 children. 2.5 because you actually had 3, but you beat one of them to near death for being gay. And 2.5 pets. You got 3 pets, and you traumatized your children so much that they beat one of the pets to near death as kind of animal cruelty catharsis. And so it's healthy and it's useful to learn from it. Not to learn from like child rearing in the 1950s. Don't do that ever again, please. No, from what's going on in the bigger Eastern European cities. When I say bigger, again, I don't just mean Moskva. I don't even just mean Prague and Kiev and Warsaw and Budapest. I mean Brno, I mean Lviv, I mean Kharkiv, I mean Dnipro, I mean Krakow. Like the only one that is really, I think, an example to avoid is the Silesia complex, and it's not that Silesia is bad, is that polycentric cities are just going to end up being very auto-oriented. It's not unique to Poland. Germany has the exact same issue. Hell, Randstad, right? It's a very polycentric city. It's a city region. You have Amsterdam, Leiden, Haag, Rotterdam, Utrecht. There's not actually a lot of public transport ridership in Holland for a region that has something like 8 million people. So they've resolved it. So I mean, they were like in the city centers you have like tramways and metros, but they don't generate that high ridership. Relative to the ridership, relative to the population of the entire complex. Now they resolve this by being very bike oriented, which I think is useful to learn from. But in general, I mean, if you want good public transport, you kind of don't want to set your cities up like this, and you want to strengthen city centers, which in Poland's case means Katowice. But in general, like the monocentric cities, they're doing very well. And so this is a good thing, and especially interesting to see to look at this kind of convergent evolution. That forgetting who was it, Tony, who told me to talk about. Yeah, Keihanshin is super bike oriented. Bear in mind, Keihanshin, yes, it's in theory tricentric, but each of the 3 centers is enormous by itself. So Osaka, Kobe, and Kyoto, I mean, yes, there are 3 centers, but they're so big that they can vaguely work like monocentric, like big monocentric cities. And so the ridership in Keihanshin is very healthy. It's, I believe, 5 billion. So 250, I want to say, 270 per. I will quibble with, so this does not include streetcars. Also, I hate my browser and I need to make sure that it stops putting me in night mode. But yeah, so this is more per capita than nearly all of Europe. I mean, it's less per capita than Prague, but it's probably comparable to Paris per capita in Paris. I mean, not exactly Texas. It's not exactly Texas. And so, so anyway, I don't want to talk. So again, I don't remember who was the one who brought it up. It might have been Tony, might have been someone else about the issue of the wrong side of the river. That's happening in Kiev and also in Warsaw. This is a general issue, which it's useful to see how convergent evolution on this happens, because this is not something that figured into Soviet planning, because Soviet planning did not think about right side of the river or wrong side of the river. The point is that there's a city center and then everything emanates from it. Let me see if we can find the Moscow Metro as an illustration again. So if you see this map, you will not be able to tell where the Moskva River passes, right? Because the lines, I mean, yeah, the lines that go under the river are actually lines that go over the river on metro bridges, but it's not very obvious from the map where it is. And I think maybe it's relevant that there's a bend. So the Moskva River, there's a bend, so and they're keeping more bend, so maybe it just isn't much of a left bank right bank culture, whereas in Paris there very much is. In London there is. It's not called right bank. Left bank is called respectively South London, North London, but same thing. And it's not because these rivers are especially wide. The Thames isn't. The Thames is like 100 meters. The Seine is, I think, 50. Yeah, embankment to embankment, this is... Oh, it's wider. Huh. Okay, now I'm doubting myself and I'm checking. Okay, so this is... Depending on where, it's 200 meters. Maybe it's more in East London than West London. And so it's about 200, and what's the... So the Seine would not be 50 because... so maybe the Seine is 100, so let's go here. Not where it's split. Yeah, it's about 120. So again, not very wide rivers, but they're culturally very important. These cities grew up earlier, so rivers were seen as bigger obstacles at a different width, maybe in the 18th century or 19th century than they are today. In London, also importantly, I believe that the lowest bridge in the city is the Tower Bridge. So there's London Bridge, there's Tower Bridge, and then there's nothing. And the reason is that the entire port of London was like this, so they didn't want to build a bridge that would interfere with shipping, and so they actually built this as a tunnel. So this is actually a 19th century tunnel. This is the first tunnel ever built under a navigable river. It was used for pedestrians and then for what is now the overground. And a road tunnel, more rail tunnels for the tube from the late 20th century. I think the next time there's I can't even tell if this is this is also a tunnel. This is this a cross-rail tunnel, or am I wrong? Or this is I think this is a DLR. So yeah, this is the next bridge on the Thames, and this is a much more modern. You see how the bridge is very high clearance? This is the duct, 61 meters. So, yeah, so there are questions of wrong side of the river. Yeah, exactly. And the so the thing is, in theory, yeah, the centers of London and Paris straddle the river, but in practice, because London is so poor in bridges, especially East London, there's been a very strong cultural separation between East London and South London. So even though historically they were both poor, in fact, Oliver Twist, as I understand it, takes place in South London, not East London. The cultures diverged. East London remained kind of a center of like working classness, whereas Southeast London actually gentrified. The poor part, as I understand, the poor parts of South London are not the ones that are right next to East London, because again, they were not in practice right next to East London because there were no connections. And there's still so many cultures, kind of culture of North versus South London. In Paris, again, right bank versus left bank, even though these were never widely separated. Remember, London exists because of London Bridge. Paris exists because Ile de la Cité breaks the Seine and there are bridges to both banks. And yet, city centre is, in both cases, on just one side of the river, North London and the right bank. Now, London was always on the north side, and then Southwark was kind of a suburb. But Westminster was also kind of a suburb and became part of city centre, and Southwark much less so. And Paris, same thing. So the history in Paris is different. So the historic centre is the island, but already in the High Middle Ages, the city centre was much more here than here. Here was the university, but all the commerce was here. And so the development of the city kind of treated this part as the center, so the Al area, and but there remained a very strong identity of left bank, complete with people saying, "Oh, the right bank is too corporate or too touristy. I'm a real intellectual. I'm a bohemian. I'm going to go to the left bank and just don't ask me how much I'm paying in rent because I want to pretend that I'm poor." And the situation is that it might be useful to connect the left bank with itself rather than just treat it as different neighborhoods emanating from the same right bank city center. And this is where the concept of M10 goes. Now, M10 is a disaster. M10 is very bad at connecting to things. But the system that it's part of, so that's M10, which is the bad part, but M6 here, which is a circumferential, but it's decent at connecting different parts of the left bank to itself. North-south lines that kind of interweave, that works decently well. And in London, there's a big attempt to connect a bunch of lines to the center of South London, that is to say, Southwark. And that's kind of, so the Paris Metro was never radial. The London Underground was. I should say is. But you can kind of see, so the difference is, London, if I show you this, it's not obvious where the Thames is, but once I tell you, you will go, oh yeah, so this is where the Thames is. So the tunnel that I thought might be Crossrail is not Crossrail. It's because I guess that part of Crossrail is not open. The tunnel is DLR. So this is the Docklands light tramway system. So it's the neck. There's a little bend here that the Jubilee line crosses twice, and then it crosses again. So there are actually 4 tunnels for the Jubilee line extension underneath the Thames. So the Thames goes something like this, under this, and then this is the route that it takes through the center. So the Circle line is entirely North London, and if I told you that the Circle line, yes, it has to be because the Circle line was built up separately, it would go, oh yeah. But you notice that these lines, the South London lines, they make a pretty good effort to all hit this central part of South London. So Waterloo and London Bridge, which are connected by very high frequency commuter trains. And this is a common thing when you have a city with a wrong side of the river, where the wrong side of the river has its own city center, to some extent at least. Now, New York had that with downtown Brooklyn, the wrong side of the river being Brooklyn and Queens. And there is, likewise in New York, a And remember, London is, other than this, a very radial system. Now, New York, again, not radial at all, so it's not surprising that it does this. So you see how a lot of lines go through downtown Brooklyn, because so you can kind of tell where the Hudson is. It's and well, this the historic center of Brooklyn would be this. So yeah, you would try to get lines not to just feed Manhattan, but to also hit this. And likewise in Queens the history is different actually. In Queens, the historic center, there wasn't one. There was nothing as big as downtown Brooklyn. It was Jamaica to some extent, and it would be Flushing, which were Germany. But because but for historic reasons, a bunch of the lines all went through Midtown, so all went to Midtown and not direct Lower Manhattan, except for the kind of peripheral Jamaica line, which is this one, the JZ. And so because the lines all passed through here, this kind of became another wrong side of river city center. And at this point, this area along Long Island City might have actually overtaken. It's unclear because of measurement problems on the map. But this might actually be a larger job center than downtown Brooklyn. These two being the largest two in the region outside Manhattan, bigger than, let's say, downtown Newark. And now with Jersey, we likewise see a wrong side of the river thing that is not very well served, just because there's just very little rail transit on the Jersey side. But if there were more rail transit, it should be coherent on the Jersey side and not just treat these as different appendages of Manhattan. So about the hills, Paris has a few hills, not many, but things like Montmartre, yeah, that exists, or Montparnasse, and yeah, but yeah, these are cities. I mean, these are not dead flat. Like Berlin is flatter, I think, but the hills, like again, I mean, yeah, I know that Prague is very hilly, but the being boxed between hills doesn't quite create the situation. Remember, in Prague, like the river is not very obvious on the metro map or in the planned metro map, and in Warsaw and in Kiev, my point is that if you know what to look for, they're either like London and Paris. So the Wisła is so the Wisła is decently wide, not extremely wide. It's like what? Okay, it's a narrow part of it. So here the Wisła is 300 something, so somewhat wider than the Thames, but not a giant difference. And yeah, it's easier to bridge now, but also it's been bridged later. So the entirety of the city center of Warsaw was developed on right bank, left bank, on the left bank of the Vistula. And so these are again wrong side or right bank suburbs. So you probably would want to create a situation where you can coherently connect them with a kind of wrong side center, which I'm not even sure what it would be. Kind of pretended it was this specific stadium when I was writing the Battle of Warsaw in World War III reel. But it can be any of these things. And like somewhere in Praga, and you want to, of course, make sure that people can connect with the actual center, but this is something that often creates a sub-center that is worthwhile to serve. And the same is happening in Kiev. Now, Kiev is on a much wider river. The Dnieper is just unusually wide. I'm not sure why. It's a very big river, but I don't even think the Rhine is this way. It's 600 meters. I think the Rhine at this point is only maybe, I want to say 400. It's something that Köln has as well. I mean, in Köln, the wrong side area, it's the right bank of the river. It's Deutz. It's the Deutz side of the river. And this is a wide river, but I mean, it's not infinitely wide. It's about Vistula wide. The Dnieper is wider. But even then, I mean, yeah, it's worthwhile connecting to Köln from, not to connecting within Köln to Deutz from a bunch of places. And it's not, and I'm not inventing something that nobody in Köln knows about. They know about it, and the Köln system is actually, let's see if it's COL. No, okay. No, do not send an email to the site administrator. I know exactly what my problem is. You don't see it would be clean. Yeah, so it's not going to be a pure map of Köln is the problem, and it's not going to be, and it's not going to, and it's going to distinguish streetcar from rapid transit based on right-of-way quality. So this is the Hauptbahnhof area, and this is the Deutz side. And you can see there's a lot of stuff that's serving that. As opposed, now there's stuff that doesn't. I mean, there are things that connect to the city center, like here, without passing through. Well, this passes through the Deutz side, but this. And so, but did you see that they're kind of setting up Deutz as a subcenter? This is not stupid. This is good. Yeah. So in Kiev, so Kiev has the bridge crossing, but Moskva also has metro bridges that cross the river. And the and the system that works in Kiev is that because the river is, again, the Rhine is 300 meters, 350 meters, the Vistula probably about the same or a little less, and the Dnieper, and again, I do not know why, because the Rhine has bigger flow. Maybe it's just a speed thing. So in theory, the main channel is 600, but I mean, there are a bunch of channels. Let's see this river, for example. Not this river, this bridge. That's more than a kilometer. And again, I have to talk about the current situation. The current situation is that it's so understood that Dnieper is an obstacle, that people are glued to their screens trying to figure out what's going on with left side versus right side invasion routes, just because it's so annoying for an army to cross the river that there are Russian units here, and so people are trying to game whether the current weather is such that they can go whoop and hit Kiev. So this is how much of an obstacle the river is, and and what this means is that it's probably useful to set up some center, let's call this center of Dniprovsky, that can actually connect within this subpart of the city. Now, this is not what Kiev actually is, because Kiev does not yet have that. Kiev. So the river is here. So the lines that cross the river, I don't remember their. So it's the red and green lines in colors. I don't remember the names. Have distinct crossings that have kind of a valley in between, but it's not a real valley. I mean, there's development here, so it's gonna be a good idea to connect them somehow, to make sure you can have an entirely wrong side, which in this case would be the left bank of the river connection. So I made a rather bold assertion about what Ukrainians should be doing. And this assertion is taken out of the fact that the Ukrainians are actually doing that. I'm going to look for this because I saw it on a map somewhere, but I cannot. Yeah, here. So this is. So remember how I said, oh yeah, they should connect this. So line 4, they're doing is what they're doing, but they're actively planning to extend line 3 like this. Now, in isolation, this looks like the drunkest thing ever, right? Um, like, why would you do this? Here is city center. Why would you do a line that loop-de-loops like this? Why? Well, there's a method to the madness. The method is it is valuable to create connections internal to the wrong side of the river, to the left bank of the Dnieper, and this means that connecting this part of town to a chosen wrong bank center, which would be this one, is rather valuable. So this is kind of a second way into city center, but more importantly, this creates this sub-center, and this is being reinforced with further plans. So I just made a certain assertion, but this is exactly what the Ukrainians are doing. Like, these are not stupid people. These people know how to plan a metro. Soviet metro planning maxims are pretty good. To the extent that post-Soviet places are screwing up their public transit, that's stuff like when Moscow decided to remove the trolley buses because they thought that the trolley buses were bad and not modern because Western Europe, other than Switzerland, doesn't really have them. So they went for batteries, and now they have 2 battery buses replacing 1 trolley bus. And I'm told that this was, and I'm told by a trolley bus watcher that this was such a farce that this was said to reflect poorly on the mayor and embarrass Putin. And so when you're learn from, so don't get me wrong, learn things that Western Europe does better, like commuter rail, but don't remove the tramways, don't remove the trolley buses when you have them, don't do any of that. These are good things, and the places in Western Europe that are at the forefront of public transit that don't have them are trying to reintroduce them the way that Berlin is expanding its tramway system, in fact, over-expanding it to be building more U-Bahn extensions, or the way that Paris has become the world, I think, 4th largest streetcar network and might overtake Prague's, and I'm not sure. So what do I think about circular lines? I think they're good. Now, a circular line can always be a twofer. So in a place like Kiev, a circular line would also be great at providing service within the subcenter. So circular lines serve multiple purposes. They help connect between radial legs if the city center connections are too far away or too overcrowded. They help reorient you between different legs if you are not gonna, like, if you're not at the ends of the two lines, but in the middles, then it's especially useful because then you might just ride the line the whole way. Now, the circular lines are not randomly drawn on a map at an arbitrary radius. They're designed to connect specific subcenters. This is another really important feature of them, to the point that some lines become somewhat circumferential just by trying to connect subcenters. In New York, that would be the G train between downtown Brooklyn and Long Island City. And finally, they connect dense neighborhoods because so let's look at Moskva. And let's not do the outer circle for a moment. Let's do the normal circle, line 5 here. Note something. The other lines, let's say line 1. Okay, in general, in Soviet metro systems, the first line was always red. That's how you know the sequencing. So on the red line, you see that it goes to the city center, but it goes to more peripheral areas, especially on the south side. I believe this is in the freeway median, actually. And note how line 5 doesn't do that. Line 5 stays within relatively central areas. Something that Jared Walker actually pointed out to me when he was talking about circular lines that, yeah, people don't travel in circles, but because in practice circular lines tend to be like this, or in Tokyo or in London or whatever, or the two lines that form the ring in Paris, lines 2 and 6, is that this ring, two lines, line 2, line 6. What he points out is that these are all in dense areas. They don't have tails. I mean, you can have a little tail like this, but you don't have big tails. Like this is a long tail on Metro 8 in the suburbs. On Metro 13, we have these rather long tails. And so, because they don't have tails, they're all in dense areas. So they're pretty strong connections between dense areas and other dense areas. Areas that are important enough that they shouldn't just be connected to city center, but also in the orthogonal direction. So in the case of Kiev, a circular line presumably would take maybe the inner segments of the fifth line that they're building, and then maybe you would go all the way here and then turn into city center, or you would just say screw it and like change the plan to go, or I mean you definitely would want to like kink and make sure you're hitting this line before you cross the river. So this might actually not be a bad thing. So it will look weird, but again, circular lines serve multiple purposes and they need to compromise between them. So this might become a branch of line 4. So and then somewhere on the right side, to be the right bank, and then like this. So bear in mind, in Paris, this is so Metro 6 is not the only part of the system that connects the left bank with itself. In London, I don't think that the overground does a great job at that. And in fact, the overground is better. I think it's vaguely inner East London, inner South London connections. And the circle line is entirely North London. But something can be done. And in Prague, I don't even know where Harib, who I'm mangling the name of, and I'm really sorry. Everybody here knows how much I think of, how highly I think of his mayor. And so a circular line, I don't even want to start drawing where it should go, but something that might want to do a kind of wrong side thing here might be valuable. I'm not sure. Again, I don't perceive Prague as having strong right side, wrong side of river identity, the way that Paris and London and Köln, and I think Warsaw and Kiev do. So something like this, I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I think I've seen maps of this, and I think one of them has the northern part of it going way too far north. Yeah, it's not Glasgow, but Britain outside London is very sad. And this includes places that actually built something like a metro, like Glasgow or Newcastle. Yeah, they're already strong tram links, but would probably PRG. Yes. So in thinner color is for trams, but then thicker color is for trams that are grade separated or physically separated from all other traffic with crossing gates. So this is how some trams are colored as if they're metro. So yeah, there are strong lines. Again, I don't know where the line should go. I'm not going to tell Zdenek. I mean, Zdenek Hrib is someone who I'm actually not going to tell how to do his job to. I mean, it's not. I mean, unlike say my current mayor Francisca Giffey, who I will absolutely tell her how she should do her job. Step 1, she should resign and leave politics. But for the record, the SPD person who I hope replaces her, except he never will, because his name is Raed Saleh and Germans are racist. He is also one of those I don't tell them how to do their jobs people. But so something like this might be valuable and then turn into a full circular line maybe. Uh, is line D the one that we're talking about, or is it another? No, this looks like another. No, line D looks like another. Radial. What are they saying? 73 billion Czech rupees, up from 25 claimed 10 years ago. Thank you. Are they going to tell me how long this is? Oh, 10 and a half. Great. Normally I work in euros on stream, but it's valuable for construction cost projects. It's 21.43 rupees to a dollar. So it is supposed to be 5. Oh my god, this is ungodly expensive. This is an ungodly expensive line right now. 73 billion over, it's really only 10 and a half kilometers. It's terrible. So yeah, don't copy the construction costs of Prague or Warsaw. Do copy the construction costs of Sofia. They're very low. So the construction costs of Bucharest are not low, but they're okay. Yeah, the actual proposal for the circle line I saw, it was extremely far north, and I still don't get why. Yeah, this is ungodly expensive. Again, I do not know why. I don't know what's going on there. And they're saying if they're saying it must go under 100, that's not filling me with a lot of confidence, to be honest. Like, I don't know, like, can I blame Babiš for this in the same way that I blame Orban for construction costs in Hungary that predate his time, because his response to questions about construction costs are like he was asked by the European Union about construction costs overrun on the Budapest metro, and he essentially said it was all a liberal, communist, capitalist, Jewish international Soros conspiracy to make Hungary look bad, as opposed to, yeah, there's a problem, we're working on it. Don't blame us. This predates us. Yeah, okay, so you have a cartel of 5 to 6 construction companies. So first of all, Italy has 4. They're now merging to 3, and as a result, the state is going to take a stake in the biggest, but up until this, they had 4. Yeah, so I don't know what's happening with your bids. I will say, by the way, the construction costs, Russia's not very good. Belarus, Ukraine is not very good either. Belarus is the average one. I saw a construction cost in Belarus that I'm not including in the project because they're saying cost per kilometer, and they're not telling me which project it is and what exactly it is, but they're saying that the cost per kilometer in PPP terms is $250 million. Yeah, no, in Czechia, I'm pretty sure their last thing was 250, and now it's 500 suddenly. That's terrible. Warsaw is 400 something on the part that goes under water, I believe, but the further stages of line 2 are more reasonable. Sofia is very cheap, I don't know why. Bucharest is average. Trying to think who else in Eastern Europe is building subways. But yeah, I do not know what's going on. Like, is it 5 to 6 construction companies? I mean, bear in mind, New York, they have 10. So it's maybe not an issue of how many companies there are, but if the companies do poorly, are you okay giving the contract to a Turkish company, or a Swedish one, or an Italian one, or a German one, or a Polish one? But again, the Turkish ones are the ones that keep aggressively bidding on stuff in Europe because they're actually cheap. Yeah, no, I'm very much a conspiracy to sap and impurify Hungary's precious bodily fluids. I say this having never been to Hungary. and nor encouraging people to move there and demographically improve it. Um, so the issue is that you finished the expansion of Line 3 and then that you finished Line 3 and then you didn't immediately go on to Line 4. I mean, that's legit. Um, Now, bear in mind that if you do poorly, then the gaps are good. In the United States, everyone had gaps in tunneling. So when they restored, so they went back to tunneling in the 1980s or whenever, things got better. And in New York, they had continuity because of Water Tunnel 3. And so the sandhogs are still around, but and they're very much a Soviet-style zombie industry. But I guess in Europe, we never had these zombie industries in construction, and in Eastern Europe, I mean, maybe these happened 30 years ago, but they're not zombies now. I mean, the construction costs in Prague were decent literally 10 years ago. They have a Turkish consortium in Stockholm. Now I'm not talking about Turkey, I'm talking about Eastern Europe, and Turkey is very distinct. I mean, Erdogan has um, features of democratic backsliding that are shared with, let's say, Orban. However, if polls hold, Erdogan is out next year. And second, um, a lot of matters of construction costs, actually, not just construction costs, a lot of matters of how the state works. Turkey looks rather Southern European to me. But at any rate, one of the contractors that I spoke to, one of the Turkish contractors, did this. He took out his phone, say this, and said, "Look, if a Swedish person says that this is an iPhone, this is an iPhone. If I say this is an iPhone, people will check and then they say that it's actually an Android." So even in Sweden, people don't really treat the Turks very well. And the way that it works is that they are required to partner with a Swedish construction company. So essentially, this is creating extra capacity because quite a lot of the time, I mean, in New York, you have. So this is me talking about construction costs right now. Um, and I'm sure it will appear in a report, which I think is deadlined at the end of April at this point. Um, please don't quote me on that. Is that there are in New York 10 to 12 pre-qualified bidders. They will just not work with anyone else, even contractors in the rest of the United States, because New York is special. And the way this works is that these contractors aren't just slaves to the MTA, right? Yeah, there are 12 contractors in New York that do work with the MTA, but they also do work with other things like private sector things. So on a given MTA contract, it's not like 12, all the 12 apply. Maybe half of them apply because the other half are doing other things. So the partnership system is the way that they can essentially keep them all like all of the contractors available for work with the public sector in Sweden because the other contractors, and I don't think it's a pre-qualified, it's just all the Swedish contractors. Sweden is a small country. So the Swedish contractors, or I guess the Nordic contractors, get, if they get private sector work, they can simultaneously do more projects, is the way I understand the way this works. So only companies we're used to. I mean, guys, you're spending $500 million a kilometer on subways. I mean, lol proven. I mean, you do prove. I mean, in general, by the way, people should talk less about how we've always done it or this is our culture when they fail. Do it when you're succeeding. Okay, if Spain doesn't want to change something because it works, they're Spain. If Italy doesn't want to change something because it works, they're Italy. When you're, let's say, Germany and you're building a kilometer of subway for the cost of in Berlin of, I don't know, 2.5 in Milan or 3 in Madrid, yeah, mess me with your culture. Wait, what? 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 Pony, you literally told me a couple months ago that when you pass by a construction site in Prague, you don't even hear anyone speak Czech. I mean, I pass by a construction site in Berlin and I don't hear people speak German. Um, I don't even keep track of what languages they speak. I imagine it would be Turkish and maybe Arabic. I imagine, yeah, where you are, it would be Ukrainian, maybe. Yeah, this is what I don't get. I mean, yeah, I mean, in general, you should do a private. So again, me talking about construction costs and not about Eastern Europe, but it has to be related. You want to have a private sector. You don't want to have privatized public services ever, but you want to have a public sector that works according to private sector norms, which means it hires people according to private sector norms. If private sector norms are you do an interview, you do an interview. If private sector norms are that someone who went to a high prestige uni is ahead in line as anyone else, that's how it works. I mean, I'm not saying you should discriminate against women like the private sector, but you should aim to hire the sort of people that the private sector is hiring and pay them extra to make sure that you get the best. And this means that if the private sector, for example, doesn't have defined benefit pensions or hires foreigners who don't speak Czech or don't speak Swedish or don't speak German, yeah, that's what you do. If private contractors manage to make do with like understanding that most of the world's construction workers do not actually speak Swedish very well, you can do the same. And I mean, this is like, I don't want to say it's a kind of cultural panic because the Nordics are the fucking kings of culturally panicking that other people don't want to be like them. And the thing is that basically everyone who moves to Sweden ends up within a few years learning Swedish. And this is um, even the Western Europeans. Okay, I mean a German office mate who was there 2 years was learning Swedish in those 2 years. And I'm not saying it's common. I mean, I like most people didn't. If it's just a 2 year thing, but yeah, I mean, within a few years, everyone learns the language. Everyone like people like there's kind of moral panic about assimilation, about immigrants assimilating, um, which you see here too. That uh, like my standard line on this is in 2020 in the summer when there was a corona outbreak in an apartment building in Neukölln, Bild and following Bild, Deutsche Welle said uh, the corona outbreak is disproportionately among people with migration background. And a few months later, deep into the second wave, when Ur Shaheen and Özlem Tiraci discover the first corona vaccine, um, Deutsche Welle does not say people of migration background, then it calls them German citizens. And never says, oh, sorry, you know how we spent years saying that immigrants are a burden on society and don't create anything? Sorry, we goofed. Uh, and yeah, so you have all the yeah, so there's all these problems, and I'm imagining there's a kind of I imagine there's a lot of cultural cringe, the same kind that leads Moscow to tear up the trolley buses and replace them with battery electrics because trolley buses are for communists. And we're Russian nationalists. God damn it, we're going to exterminate the Ukrainians without having a universal healthcare system. And the and so and in the same way that it's even leading to a revision in which Moscow actually has reduced construction costs. I mean, they're reduced from very high levels to merely high levels because they learned to stop building deep tunnels in areas where they can build shallow. But I guess they're trying to. But I guess a lot of it comes from like trying to imitate certain Western things, and at least my understanding from what you've told me is that, and then also from what I'm seeing geopolitically, is that Eastern Europe is very sour on continental Western European norms. People pretty justifiably mock Germany over everything and mock France over another set of everything. And to the point that there's, for example, much more comfort, I think, with Britain. And if you're learning from Britain, uh, yeah, you're not going to have good infrastructure. I'm sorry. You might have really swank parties held by the prime minister and his cabinet, at the peak of Corona lockdowns. This is something that you can have. Um, and you might have very opulent palaces for one family to live in. But you won't have good public infrastructure. I'm sorry, Britain is not good at that. And the really, so like I don't know if Czechia is imitating Britain in things like privatizing the state. I know that there's a lot of neoliberalism. It basically every party in Czechia and in Slovakia, but but I don't know if it's like literally the privatize the state aspect, or if it's the we don't want, or if it's the what me work with companies outside the ones I'm familiar with mentality, which is, I mean, I don't know if it's a British mentality, it's an American mentality, but it's not like an American neoliberal mentality. It's an American urban mentality that's like very much people maybe feel like they're under some kind of siege and they don't want to change anything, but it's again, but it's not. But it's not the same kind of mentality that leads governments to privatize the state to design build contracts. Um, I do not. I fail to see what the problem is with this particular. I mean, I get that the poles here are very thick, and they do not need to be this thick, and the wires could be made thinner. But honestly, this looks like a very cozy place to walk around. Um, The only big change I would do is that if we saw something like this, is I would take this building and make it, instead of one floor, maybe six floors. Um, yeah, yeah, it's meant to mock the project, but it does not look bad. It's like how, yeah, it's like how one of these Scott Wiener, like anti NB posters that one of the NIMBYs in the Bay Area drew, showing people what buildings would be legalized under SB 50, and they looked like these really nice Parisian apartment buildings, and all the MB said, "Ooh, I wish I could live in such a place." Um, but anyway, yeah. So I don't know what's going on with construction costs in Czech, and all of this looks pretty. Let's see if I can make this work. This is an IRL suburban. Okay, it's not working when I try to copy paste it, so something is screwy. Oh, okay, good question. Since I'm already transitioning to questions, what effect do I think that the effect it has on walkability in transit? So my familiarity as a pedestrian is mostly with East Berlin, um, which is not hyper tall. It's 12 stories. Um, And honestly, it looks fine. I mean, so I live very close to the wall on the East Berlin side of the wall. So I live in a new building because I guess this area was in the exclusion zone. But you go a little far, like a little away from the wall toward like the center of Meta or something, and and actually you do see some 10, 12-story buildings, and they're actually pretty nice, at least from the outside. And so, what effect does it have on walkability? I mean, yeah, it's something to walk nearby. At least the way that it's set up now, it isn't too different from pre-war cities. So in a pre-war city, you would have, let's say, like somewhere between 5 and 9 stories in the building, depending on how big the city is. So in Paris, it would be 7, 8, 9. In Köln, it's 5, maybe even just 4. Like, usually not. It's probably going to be 5, 6 in city center. And there's going to be retail at the corners, and on the more important stage, there's going to be retail on the ground floor. There's never any kind of residential only building. I mean, sorry, a building might be residential only, but there's never there's nothing that looks like residential only zoning. So a side street might have a mix of ground floor retail and ground floor no retail. And essentially, this is the same as how this part of Berlin looks. So the housing projects tend to not have ground floor retail. And the way I understand it is that they were built this way. So the ground floor might be whatever. It might be ground floor housing. It might be ground floor doctor's office. It's one of the buildings that's between me and the supermarket. It's like that. But then you might have a building that was not like this that has ground floor retail. It doesn't look, again, it's not too different from a Parisian street, to be honest. Like if the entire city looks like this, then it is very repetitive, I think. But usually when the entire city is like this, these are called micro districts, and they do have their own community amenities. Not usually usually linear along the streets. They're going to be in the center. I don't think Gropiusstadt is too different actually from this norm, and Gropiusstadt is very walkable. Thank you very much. It's like not a very traditional street Gropiusstadt, but in Gropiusstadt you can live your entire life without a car. And it's going to be kind of annoying, but the reason it's kind of annoying is not because the area is unwalkable, it's because Gropiusstadt is rather far. Like, this is Gropiusstadt. And I think every Berlin event, if so much has been invited to, it's either within the ring or at most, I think maybe one U-Bahn stop outside the ring. And so so this is actually decently walkable. These get really poor reputation in the US and maybe the UK, and I think in the United States the poor reputation comes from the fact not so much that it's unwalkable. In New York, I think, is the most housing project-y American city. I think it's the only American city where there was significant project housing inhabited by white people. In other American cities, maybe did it a little bit later and was done differently with the Great Migration, so it was negatively stereotyped as something only for black people. The projects is a term that connotes blackness in the United States, as in New York. But New York also has white people projects, like Stuyvesant Town. This one. It was segregated. It was forbidden for black people to live there. An annoying math professor who was white but broke the rules by renting to black people was, I think, actually investigated by the House Un-American Activities Committees, and Robert Moses made sure he would never be able to work in America again, and he ended up moving to Canada. Now, this area, I mean, it doesn't have street amenities or anything, but this is Manhattan. You can live here without a car. That's fine. And again, I said this is white people project, but equally true of black people projects, which would be in Harlem. At Columbia, I lived in this building. This is a Pratt building, I think 1903. But on the way to quite a lot of places, I would pass by these buildings, and yeah, power in the park is kind of weird. And the lack of street wall is kind of annoying, but first of all, there's literally a supermarket here. There's retail here. Like, it's a tower. This is a tower on a base. This is something that I can't think of an exact example, but I'm pretty sure that I've definitely seen ground floor retail in very tower-y neighborhoods in Berlin. I just don't remember if it's towers on a base or if it's towers and then there's a section that's not tower or a section that's tower and then ground floor retail. Frankfurter Allee specifically, it's all towers like this. And Frankfurter Allee, it's towers with ground floor retail. So if it's a main street, they will put retail on the ground floor. So here there's ground floor retail, including a supermarket called Met Foods that was kind of bad and expensive because all of New York supermarkets are this, but was still in many ways better than the higher end supermarkets that are not project. again, it's walkable. I mean, I'm sure the car ownership here is very low. It's Manhattan. It's Manhattan. Yeah, it's Harlem, but it's still Manhattan. And the people who live in these projects don't make a lot of money. Yeah, I doubt any of these people has, like, it's walkable. Um, does Berlin have projects with a street in the sky? Oh, you mean with an overpass between buildings? I can think of any. Like, overpasses are pretty distinct, are very distinctive, and I don't even think of them as a project thing. I think of them as a Calgary thing. Calgary has a lot of these in city center. And I mentioned this in my video on light rail for growing auto-oriented city, because Calgary is a rather good example of getting semi-decent model split out of such an environment. And I mentioned that it's hard to build an L through Calgary because the second story is already kind of, say, here, here. Like they have all these overpasses between buildings because Calgary in the winter gets very cold and they don't want people to have to walk on the street. I think Montreal has these as underpasses. Um, so I think of this as like a feature of dealing with harsh weather. Singapore has these to stay within air conditioning range, as some underpasses between shopping centers and such. Taipei. Uh, I don't think Berlin has these, not that I can think of. Um, I see what you mean. Hmm. Yeah, I don't think it's much of a thing in Berlin. I mean, you might have like a vestibule or you might have like steps to something, but that usually to an elevated U-Bahn station. I think of it as a Coty thing, but it's not quite a. But you're not going to have second story retail very much, even in Coty. I know that New York has some second story retail in Long Island City. In some of the passageways for the elevated parts of the subway. Again, I think of it as something that you do in a city that maybe is very large and needs second story retail. Like I won't say like New York, but actually I think of it as mostly an Asian thing in New York. It's most common in Asian neighborhoods that are trying to imit that to the best ability to their best ability under American zoning. They try to bring what they're familiar with, and it's actually pretty good urbanism when it's permitted. Uh, and but no, these kind of passes are not a thing here as far as I can tell. Um, I gotta ask, are there other questions about like the issues of like Eastern Europe, like sort of Eastern European urbanism? Remember, like the main lessons are don't kill the trams. Like seriously, don't kill the trams. Keep the trams. It doesn't generalize very much because there aren't places that are killing their trams right now, except maybe St. Petersburg. Because everyone else has already finished doing that or never had them. Like it's not like you can hope that someone from India is going to watch this and know not to kill their historic tramways because they don't have any. I mean, in India, my lesson would be don't kill your or don't work against your historic commuter rail. Actually, invest in your historic commuter rail. Yes, I know you think it's for poor people. Wait 20 years. Um, yeah, but Leeds does not have historic streetcars. Leeds has light rail, and and so Britain has recent light rail lines, and the light rail lines get really weird. So the Leeds situation, for example, has to deal with a lot of American-style red tape, where you need a business case and an equity case. And so the business case means you have to hit rich neighborhoods. Yeah, turn legacy rail to an S-Bahn first. This is a Western European lesson, not an Eastern European lesson. Eastern European has underdeveloped S-Bahns. So keep the trams, get the development, again, make sure not to abandon city center. Which kind of weird given that it was very much abandoned for residential purposes, but not for jobs. Avoid job sprawl. Like, yeah, if you wanna build a factory, don't build it in city center or anything. But the I don't know, people's Ministry of State Security or anything like that, keep it in city center, or or any other office, or an office doing something that's actually useful, which the Stasi et al. Did. And I'm not saying Stasi because they were Eastern European. I'm saying like literally every spy agency like this is completely useless. Just as a reminder, Fidel Castro died of old age. And so keep the offices in city center. Keep making sure that the housing that is permitted near metro stations. These are all very good lessons. When you're building a metro, make it work with the trams, not against the trams. In America, the equivalent lesson is when you build light rail, work with the buses, not against the buses. This is a very Seattle lesson, actually. So in Seattle, Seattle is the only American city that had a significant increase in model split between the early and late 2010s. And the way that they managed to do it is they built light rail, but I mean, a lot of American cities did. But what they did is instead of cutting buses, they redeployed buses to feed light rail better. And this is also something that Calgary did. So it's the same thing on the higher level of when you have a metro, don't kill the trams. Make the trams and the metro work together. What are my thoughts on tech park? Can city centers do large floor area offices of tech firms use? Absolutely. In the United States, the tech firms go into city centers because the city centers do permit high rises. The high rises do have sufficient floor plates. The city centers are also very easily accessible from everywhere. I do not know to what extent how mature the state of gentrification is in Poland and the Baltics, that it is expected that urban middle-class workers are going to be living in multiple different neighborhoods from which they can commute to city center, as opposed to one gentrified zone. Now in Berlin, it's mature in this situation, not because gentrification here is as long a history as in New York or London or Paris or Boston or San Francisco, but because of the peculiarities of the wall, moving the gentrification in rather weird directions. So the Berlin tech workers live roughly within city center from U6 or the north-south. So from the main, let's go from the main north-south lines east. So Schöneberg is roughly the western outpost. Kreuzberg, Friedrichshain are very popular. Prenzlauer Berg, Mitte. Gesundwohnen actually has a tech space that a co-working space that's literally called the Unicorn. Neukölln has a little bit, and so does Wedding. The issue is that tech workers, the tech industry is so anglophone that tech workers come from everywhere. Germans, especially native-born Berliners, come in with negative stereotypes of Neukölln. So the only reason they're living in Neukölln is if they already is if they're locked in to 15-year-old rent control, as one of the people I met at Queer Spaces is, or if they're just very radical queers, which this person is, despite being racist also and hating the Middle Easterners in the neighborhood. Or if you can't afford better, and if you can't afford better, and you're a white German, you're not going to live in Neukölln, you're going to live in Marzahn, because you don't think of Marzahn as a dangerous neighborhood if you're Aryan. And the sort of people who move to Neukölln tend to be immigrants. This includes Arab and Turkish immigrants, the largest groups, but also me. Or Asian immigrants, or Eastern European immigrants. American immigrants don't really see anything wrong with Neukölln. The sort of cues of this area is sketchy, stay away, in America work differently from Germany. And the same is mirrored on the opposite side, on the Neukölln of the north, let's call it, aka Gesundwohnen. So the tech here tends to be in Friedrichshain, which is decently accessible from all of these places. And I do not know whether Warsaw, for example, is also like that, or Riga, or Vilnius, or whether there's one specific sector that's supposed to be the sector from which the tech workers are drawn, and so you just suburbanize in that direction and expect everyone to want a car. I don't know what the urban geography in these cities is. Again, I will say that in Berlin, the tech firms absolutely are in city center. In fact, Amazon is literally building a high rise that all the NIMBYs hated. Thankfully, they stay hating, and the building is being built at Warschaustrasse. Um, I think it's. I don't know if it's reflected in Google on Google, but the building I believe it's this long, and this might be a little bit out of date. The building I think has just risen above grade under construction, and so the answer is yes, it can be done. In fact, it is done. I do not know why it shouldn't be done in Eastern Europe. Maybe there's a aversion to having high rises. Again, we have this in Berlin too. The city's full of NIMBYs. The NIMBYs are literally running the government. The deal that they made is that SPD gets to keep its failure of a mayor, and instead the Greens get their NIMBYism. Oh, if you're doing a La Défense type officers, yeah, a really important lesson from Paris and Stockholm: don't do that. Put them in city center. Like they're not like high rises are nice. I mean, I'm not saying that the entire city should have identical looking high rises or anything, but having a couple high rises amidst the mid rise is nice. So please, BMB. Oh, speaking of EMB, I forgot to say, I think it's EMB Poland that pointed out that Poland has very high levels of construction. Let me see if I can find this here, because I do not know what the level, how much construction there is anywhere else in Eastern Europe. Let me see. I need to actually do a check. EMB Poland. I think it's. Let's not do Warsaw because Warsaw might be mentioned many times in other contexts. Let's do Katowice. And if that's not, yeah, that's one. This is new housing units built in a year per 1,000 people. To put things in perspective, what I think of as the world's EMB capitals, which are Tokyo, Seoul, and Istanbul, are about 10 each. Tokyo is 10 within the city. I do not know in the suburbs. Seoul is actually less than 10 in the city. The suburbs are more, but it's it's on top of metro lines and commuter lines. So the Seoul region is 10. Istanbul, the city, is the entire region. It's about 10 or 11. So this should be your baseline for EMB, and Warsaw hits that. There's actually more than that. Katowice, Wrocław, Poznań, which is the laggard. It only builds 8. So this is another actually really important thing to learn from at least Poland. Build more fucking housing. So these are the EMB baselines. Berlin is about 5. So Eastern Europe, some immigration or all the immigration? What do you mean? What numbers? These numbers? These are new housing units built per 1,000 people per year. And it's just the last year. This is 2020, I guess, because or maybe 2021. Yeah, so this so here you can see it over many years. And this is in absolute numbers. And here's the legend on the chart. San Francisco. Cities that if you add all three of them combined, you probably get to about the same income as San Francisco, maybe. No, you don't quite reach that. Poland's wealthy, Poland's not that wealthy, but it's as much as 1/3 of San Francisco. Yeah, this. Again, I don't know whether Prague is like this, or Budapest, or Bratislava, or Kiev. Or I guess Poland is one of the fastest growing Eastern European countries. Again, here. But I think the Baltics are also pretty fast growing. I don't know anything about the housing permitting rates there. Yeah. Why not? What is it? Is it just like lack of buildable land? But I mean, there has to be still buildable land near the metro, right? Or is it all depleted and now because of the hills, and now they can't build more because you have construction costs that are threatening to dethrone London. I mean, not quite, but you're getting there. Oh shit! Yeah, that's terrible. Yeah, no, 10,000 new flats in 1 year for Prague is at 1.7 city, or is it more? 1.3, yeah. If Prague is 1.3, then 10 is good. It's just that, yeah, it should not be the best year to be a multi-year average. Yeah, it's more than 1%. It's 10,000 units on 1.3 million people, and units have more. Like usually, the ratio should be about 2 to 1. So 2 people to a unit, I believe, is the rate on the margin. Now it's usually less because new units mean people move out of their parents' place faster, or they stop taking millions of housemates. But that's essentially like higher living standards. Like I mean, excluding that, it should be like the growth rate you should be eyeing is 2 times housing units per capita. When you say housing affordability is through the roof, you mean rents are through the roof, because housing affordability is rents with a negative sign. Yeah, you do need more, but I'm actually kind of surprised that, especially with the comparison of how much how much the Polish cities are building, just because I mean, yeah, Poland has, yeah, Poland is poorer than Czechia, but Poland is growing much faster, I guess. But I mean, sorry, the other way around. Poland is growing much faster, but Poland is still poorer than Czechia. So I would expect that, for example, rural migration would be the same in both places, or immigration from Eastern Europe or maybe Turkey. Um, like, I mean, there's no way that Warsaw is less racist toward immigrants than Prague, right? Great. Let me see if I can. Kiev housing starts. Are people building housing in Kiev? Just out of curiosity. Oh my God, you're doing this communist thing. Okay. So there's a Soviet thing that drives me up the roof. I think it's a Soviet thing because I see it also in China, where they never say how many units are built, but they say the total floor area. In China, it's much easier to find out how many the total floor area of apartments that have been built in, let's say, Beijing or Shenzhen last year than the number of units. So the total area of new construction amounted to 4 million square meters. Total area, and total area grew. Let me see if I can parse this correctly. Oh, I guess because the issue is that 4 million is in all of Ukraine. So in Kiev, okay, so 4 million in all of Ukraine is anemic, because if we're pretending it's 100 square meters for an apartment and it's 4, which is 8 per year, divided by pretend 100, and Ukraine has 40 million people. This is 200,000. Kiev would be, I guess Kiev would be healthier, right? Because if it's a half year, then okay, whatever. I mean, not enough people live there that's going to change them. I guess this might be a little healthier if it's this amount, and then Kiev is 3 million. So it'd be 500,000, but it's still. I mean, Kiev needs to be building more, by which I mean people need to guarantee that investment in Ukraine will not become target practice for SVR artillery. Okay, okay, bear in mind that when I put the 800 euros through what's called through the PPP converter, I'm getting into not much less than what I'm paying, and Berlin market rents are not a very nice thing to pay. Thanks, all the people are paying 1/3 market rent because of rent control, or because they know a guy. But yeah, no. So Prague, yeah, I guess Prague is just not very big. Again, I don't know why. I'm kind of curious. What's the problem? What's the problem there? But anyway, if there are no more, like, I mean, I'm going to just take more questions in general about transit issues and related issues in Eastern Europe. And again, I talked a lot about problems, but remember, the insight that metro networks work best when they work with the tramways rather than as a way of getting tramways out of cars' ways, as in post-war Germany, it's actually a really precious thing. And the result is that in the most comfortable parts of Eastern Europe, you don't need a car. I mean, there's this idea that you got. What about what advice on Eastern European intercity trains? Invest in them. I mean, it depends on which country. Like, I don't think there is like one general Eastern European pattern the way there is for metro systems, and for public housing and for what's it called and for tramways. So, for example, my understanding is that the Czech railways are actually good about having it tact, and PKP goes, "Lol, enjoy your daily train to the capital," and but yeah, like the problem when you're doing a Visegrad tact, it soon becomes a Europa tact. And I mean, the one thing I will say is learn from Austria, just because of scale issues and because Austria has very good intercity rail. But again, I don't need to tell, for example, Czechia and Slovakia to learn from Austria. They know, they already do that. In the same way that I don't need to tell Belgrade that it should build a metro system because they already know that they need to be building a metro system. They know that they're the largest city in Europe that does not have a metro. They're fixing that as we speak. They began construction, I believe, a few months ago. Again, people in Eastern Europe actually understand how Western Europe works pretty well. I mean, you always have brain farts like when Moscow again removes the trolley buses, and the results are a disaster. And I'm talking about disaster as in the sense that, in like the human rights sense, just functionally bad. It means that people who are going to go to work, I don't actually know if all these people own cars or anything. I imagine not all of them do. The sort of people who are going to go to work at FSB to like figure out how to troll Twitter better to and encourage extreme right and encourage extreme right terrorism in NATO. They're going to have a harder time getting to work because of that. But again, you look at the actual quality of transit in a place like Warsaw. Uh, Ukraine will have to become manufacturing heavy. What pattern difference from serving? I don't actually think that Ukraine is going to go through manufacturing. My guess is that Ukraine and Belarus will have very high education levels. My understanding is that what they're doing is a lot of outsourcing for tech, just because they have competent tech workers, and like I don't think they're any less competent than German tech workers, and they earn a very small fraction of what German tech workers earn. And actually, so Belarus is a lot wealthier than Ukraine. In Belarus, the outsourced tech workers are considered like an important enough part of the middle class that the that their participation in the protests was among the factors that scared Lukashenko into, oh my God, people don't like me. If I don't shoot them, then they might actually become an opposition force and replace me. And so my guess is it's gonna not involve labor intensive semi-skilled manufacturing, just because the skill levels are incredibly high. It's gonna be probably labor intensive high skill thing, so like back end for tech, and then it's going to become front end for tech. I mean, there's always going to be someone who's going to build a really cool video game in one of these places and make it big. That's my guess. Like, I don't think they're going to do heavy manufacturing. The problem with heavy manufacturing is, you need a very specific kind of worker training, for example, and it's something. Or if you don't, you can spam workers. Now, you can spam workers if you have very low wages, and Ukraine has very low wages. But first of all, Ukraine has very low wages for Europe. It does not have, it's not the sort of place that you would randomly outsource to if you're thinking of outsourcing to a non-European place. I would think of it as a place that's maybe already getting a little bit too expensive. Um, and, and the second thing is, again, these are, so 60%, no, 62% of Ukrainians aged 25 to 34 have university degree. Yeah, yeah. Exactly. I mean, there's and I think Heroes of Might and Magic after 3DO went bankrupt. I mean, it was owned by Ubisoft. I believe that the studio that they actually sent to make the game was Russia. So the kind of economic development that I think is going to happen in that part of Eastern Europe is not going to be very manufacturing heavy. Just these are places with very high levels of education for their income. And usually what you do is the more labor intensive versions of frontier industry. South Korea in the 60s and Taiwan in the 60s, these were both very educated places for how poor they were, by which I mean most people were literate. So yeah, you send them to operate machinery that requires people to be able to read the instructions, and requires people to like understand at some basic level that they should work really hard and not like randomly take lunch breaks 3 times a day, and then they will earn money and they can save the money. But manufacturing is no longer frontier. Like the whole point of what Korea was doing is it was doing manufacturing. It was doing labor-intensive manufacturing, but it was exporting pretty sophisticated things. Um, I'm actually kind of curious. I'm actually kind of curious about this because like I somehow would expect programming jobs in Kiev to not be that much of an elite because I mean I know what you make in Prague, and I mean the same wage in Kiev would be like I don't want to say oligarch levels of wealth, but I mean a lot of people would, yeah. Um, so again, this is actually kind of surprising. I was expecting to be a pretty high wage, but maybe not literally higher than Prague. So the point is that I expect these cities to. I don't want to say skip manufacturing. It's bullshit to skip manufacturing. They did manufacturing. Ukraine was entirely heavy manufacturing. I mean, what do you think it had in not the early communist era when it was agriculture and famine, but let's say 60s, 70s, 80s? Yeah, it was heavy zombie industries. So I don't think that trying to make the zombie industries less zombies is going to work. Like manufacturing is not especially labor intensive at this point, except very low end things like textile. Like yeah, yeah, you could do it if you're Bangladesh, but Bangladesh is hella poor. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, all the, I mean, yeah, I mean, Putin just, I guess, wants to return all the T-72s to where they come from. And or the is the T-80 is the Russian version, T-84 is the Ukrainian one, right? Anyway, so, oh, what advice would I have for immigration into Eastern Europe? Uh, let people in and stop being racist. Um, so actually, a lot of the cities do have immigration. I mean, they're starting from very low levels, in the same way that London was starting from a very low level in the 1950s, and today it is a very rainbow city. Um, I think I think Warsaw is only like 3% foreigners, mostly Ukrainians and Belarusians. Um, just let more people in. It's fine. I mean, these people are probably going to be Arab. That's okay. I mean, an Arab person who speaks Polish is still Polish, in the same way that a Nigerian jazz player who moves to Poland in, I believe, his 20s and learns the language is so Polish that he's fucking passing messages to Armia Krajowa. If you're wondering who I'm talking about, it's this guy. Very base dude. Um, oh. Okay. Oh, I didn't realize. I thought it was the chain from T-72. I didn't realize it was. Okay. And then the T is the T-90 from the T-80 or the T-72, and then the T-14 is from. I think nothing. That tank is barely less vaporware than the main ground combat system at this point. Oh, I did answer. I did answer. Triangles are better. What this? I mean, yeah, he was very conspicuous, and he was still passing. Don't call it protests. They were. It was an underground armed uprising, and yeah, he was passing messages. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people did. A lot of leaders did survive. I mean, quite a lot of leaders survived and then were show trialed to death after the war. He wasn't, specifically because the Soviet Union was trying to not be racist against black people. Um, So they even let him. So they even let him leave, even for hating communism. He ended up settling in London. He considered himself culturally Polish and was a member of Polish vets organizations. Okay, yeah, sure. Why are all tanks like 40 plus years old? Which, I mean, why are they not making EMBTs finally? But I mean, besides like uh the EMBT, like such doing ground promises. And like, I mean, are there other questions about Eastern European subway construction and related issues? This has been, as always happens, the recording time lies a little bit. It's been 3 hours so far. This feels kind of weird in saying T90 should replace them when they're already going to the next tank, the T14, which again exists in like I think 5 units or something. Is financing metros becoming harder? I do not know. Um, I honestly don't know. Like I don't know. So I don't know where the financing for all these Eastern European systems comes from. I know that it's a it's some combo of domestic and EU, but I do not know the proportions. I do not know the trend in the proportions, and I do not know which of these is easier to get right now. So I don't know if the EIB right now is. So I know that the EU passed the 750 billion euro climate package. Uh, in the for in I want to say the for between the first two waves of Corona, and it will go to things like this, but also other things. I don't know how lush it means that financing is going to get. And Eastern Europe had a rather shit year in 2020, for reasons that are a combo of poverty and rather shit leaders. Uh, and you can even see this, not India, it's not going to show 2021 yet because it's a year of recovery and unemployment rates in most of these places are very low. EU unemployment rate is at a multi-decade low. I think Eurozone unemployment is at this point the lowest since the euro was first introduced. Am I missing something? Usually I think of it as 10 countries. V4, the Baltics, Romania, Bulgaria. Oh, Slovenia is the um, Slovenia is the um, yeah. So note, all of them had pretty hard crashes. The only one that didn't is Lithuania, which I think was relatively low corona at first before it got to it. But again, 2021 is just gonna go. Yeah, but global rates, I mean, global rates matter insofar as you're looking for international financing. And these places never get international financing, they get domestic or EIB. So you don't go onto the open stock market ever and ask for money, as I understand it. You either go domestic or the EU loans you money. Now, if you're Hungary and Poland, you're probably not going to get money from the EU because the EU realizes that you're run by a kleptocrat. And literally, like a couple days ago, the court said, yeah, the EU can withhold funding to Hungary and Poland. But as I keep reminding everyone on Twitter, most of Eastern Europe is not Hungary or Poland. Like Babiš is hella corrupt, but Babiš is also not the current prime minister of Czechia. like I hope I'm answering your question, but it's like I don't like I'm not gonna say no. The financing is gonna be easy. I'm saying I don't know, but like it's not like it's certainly not going to be about anything about, let's say, American raising rates or something like that. Like if the U.S. keeps rate like actually if the U.S. raises rates, then it's going to stimulate exports from Europe to the United States. So that should not be a problem. Are there other questions, by the way? Again, this is 307, but it's three times. Um, if there are more questions, I'm going to do a. Oh, the legend of the. Wait, what? Legend of the Secret University Station? I've never heard of that. Let me check. Is it this one? I've never I've never heard that. Piazza Romana? Huh, okay. Okay. Yeah, the isn't I think there's a secret bit, which I mean secret, I mean everyone knows. Subway for Congress also in the US. Like I don't think this is a specifically Soviet thing. Like I mean, or there are ghost stations in Paris for segments that were shuttered. It's not very common. I mean, Paris is better at adaptive reuse than New York or Berlin, but it happens. London also. London has an abandoned station. When they extended the Jubilee line in the 90s, uh, they abandoned the Charing Cross station, I believe it was. Yeah. No, not the original. Yeah, Aldwych, I think is the station that was abandoned. Aldwych, I guess. Yeah, so no, Aldwych is where it doesn't hit, but Charing Cross, yeah, that's the station that was killed. Um, by the way, Pony, I'm proud of you for spelling it like this, and not with a P. I mean, I come from a very militarized country. Do you know how many people would love for there to be a secret subway system in central Tel Aviv for like the IDF that they could use, but there isn't any. I mean, Tel Aviv has military installations in city center, but they don't have subway. I think they're about to open one, but that's an open civilian project for which, yeah, the military aspect is yes, some people commute to their job, um, bombing civilians in Gaza, just as other people commute to their job at like the museum or the tech firm. Anyway, are there other questions? Fidget spinner does actually make noises that people fidget spin. Oh, sure. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. This was a long one. So yeah, thanks. And remember, yeah, there's a lot of shit in Eastern Europe. And I mean transit-wise. Um, but lots of really important things to learn from in Western Europe. Remember, Prague has better models of it than we do. Um, and it's not, oh, they're poor, because no, Prague is not a poor city. It's actually poor rural parts have way more cardios. So it's, again, it's just understanding how they've evolved and learning. And unfortunately, Western Europe doesn't like learning from Eastern Europe very much. Um, I think the only time Eastern Europe is ever referenced positively is when a Western European racist is saying we have to be racist because because the Eastern Europeans want us to be racist. Like literally, it's something that Sadhu said about immigration maybe 2 months ago. So the but on stuff like understanding how, in the same way that people in Northern Europe look down on Southern European engineering, leading to very low construction costs, people in Western Europe look down on the sort of trams and metro system that you see in a place like Warsaw or Prague. And likewise look down on this kind of integration of housing with transportation. This is something that's really important to not do, to like not denigrate regions just because they're a little bit poorer. And they often even aren't poorly. Again, Prague is not a poor city. Um, so I will see you again hopefully next week. And thank you. And remember, always, Slava Ukraini. Героям слава.